The man in the red tie was waiting on my doorstep when I got back from my shift at the warehouse. My last shift at the warehouse, to be precise. Without warning, my entire crew had been laid off. I had driven home in a numb haze, half thrilled that I might never see that soul-sucking place again, and half terrified about how I was going to pay next month's rent. I was so distracted that I almost walked right over top of the guy. "Benjamin Alexander Hearn?" he asked officiously. I told him that just Ben was fine. Nobody had called me Benjamin since high school detention. "My name is Osgood Mosby, of Mosby and Sons Solicitors." The man in the red tie went on. "I have an important message for you regarding the final testament of Jennifer Price. May we speak inside?" Jennifer Price. I hadn't thought about my mother in years. Apart from the photos that my father had shown me when I was a child, I had never actually seen her. And that was fine with me. As far as I was concerned, my father was my only real family. Jennifer Price was just some woman who had brought me into the world and then left me to fend for myself. To his credit, my father never blamed her for walking out on us. When I asked why she left, he would only shrug and say, "Oh, I'm sure she had her reasons." After a long day of work, he barely had the energy to heat up dinner and play with me for an hour or two before collapsing into bed. And as I got older, I came to understand that the questions that I was asking only caused him pain. If he was keeping any of my mother's secrets, he took them with him to the grave. I stared down at the manila envelope in the little bald lawyer's hands, wondering what it could possibly contain. An apology letter, the rights to some mostly empty bank accounts and a mountain of debt. It wasn't until I sat down across from Osgood Mosley that I realized what his visit really meant. My mother, my last living relative, had passed on. It was a lonely, hollow feeling, and I hadn't expected it to hit quite so hard. "Firstly, Benjamin, let me say that I'm sorry for your loss," Osgood Mosby began. "All these visits are never easy, but we've been entrusted with the execution of your mother's will." The lawyer paused. Something about the situation rubbed him the wrong way, but I couldn't tell what. "As you'll see here," he continued, "her assets are entirely tied up in Weeping Tree Books. Taking ownership of the store is therefore practically a requirement to inherit." I blinked. My mother had owned a bookstore. Stranger still was the address. It was less than a 15-minute drive away. I had always imagined my mother living with some swanky New York art dealer or belly dancing on some hippie commune out west, but apparently she had never left my hometown. Why had she never reached out to us? Part of me wanted to rip the packet and throw it in the trash, but another part was grimly curious to know what had made this bookstore so much more important than our own flesh and blood. Looking through the numbers gave me another reason to hesitate. While Weeping Tree Books wasn't going to make me rich by any means, it would be better than scrounging around for another warehouse job. Osgood waited patiently while I read, and then we signed some papers and he told me that he would be in touch. Something jingled in the bottom of the folder. "The bookstore keys," Osgood explained. "Ordinarily, I wouldn't leave them with you until everything is finalized, but this is hardly an ordinary situation. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon." With that, the lawyer stood, adjusted his tie, and left. As soon as I was sure that he was gone, I bolted to my car and sped across town to a place that I had never heard of. A little shop called Weeping Tree Books. The place wasn't easy to find. It was located in a maze of courtyard shops set back from the nearest street. If I hadn't been looking for it, I don't know how I would have even known that it was there. The other stores included an accounting firm, a nail salon, and a hole-in-the-wall Chinese restaurant. None of them seemed very busy, but I could see right away how the shop had gotten its name. There was a tall, gnarled willow tree in the center of the courtyard. I pressed my face against the window of the bookstore, but I couldn't make out anything in the dusty gloom. It felt like I was being watched, but the only living thing nearby was the enormous tree at my back. With a shiver, I turned the key in the lock. A dusty bell clanged over my head as I stepped inside. I don't know what I was expecting. With its yellowed ceiling and ugly gray and green carpet, the place felt like a gigantic filing cabinet. Narrow aisles took a surreptitious route toward the back of the store, which from where I was standing, I couldn't even see. Behind the display shelves was a wooden counter, an old-fashioned cash register, and a door labeled "Staff." My throat tightened. I felt my heartbeat accelerate. If my mother had left anything behind, that's where it would be. I was heading toward it when I heard a loud thump from the nearest aisle. A book had fallen from a shelf. It was so large and heavy that I couldn't imagine how it could have happened, unless it had been pushed. "Hello?" I called out. Of course, nobody answered. With the hair on the back of my neck standing up, I continued toward the staff room door. I found the key, pushed open it, and gasped. The room on the other side was a mini apartment, complete with a twin-sized bed, a miniature bathroom, and overhead storage. It reminded me of photos that I had seen of living quarters on submarines, rugged and almost cozy, in a claustrophobic sort of way. The bed was unmade, as though somebody, maybe even my mother, had been sleeping in it recently. A woman's clothes were in the cabinets, and there were other signs of life as well. Clothes, perfume, toothpaste. A tiny wrinkled photo was stuck in the corner of the mirror. It was a picture of a baby. Of me. The strangest thing was the total absence of technology. There was no laptop or alarm clock, not even a phone charger. I pulled my own phone from my pocket and discovered uneasily that, even though we were in the middle of town, I didn't have any service. The dusty bell above the main door clanged. A customer. Now I was going to have to explain to them who I was, what I was doing there, and why the shop was in fact still closed. I took a deep breath and turned around.
"You're not Jenny."
The wispy voice came from a young girl in an old-fashioned dress. The evening sun at her back made it impossible to see her face, but her irritation was clear and a little frightening. I felt like I was being accused of something. Miss Price isn't available right now. We're actually not even open for business, so..."
"Jenny said my order would be here. She promised."
The girl took a step toward me and extracted something from the apron of her dress. Something bladed and razor sharp that glinted in the dying rays of sunlight. She had a knife.
"I want my order,"
the girl repeated, shaking with anger. I was about to yell something about how I would call the police if she didn't leave, but my cell wasn't working, and even the fragile-looking child in front of me could do a lot of damage to me or herself with that sharp edge before they got here. I put on my dumbest customer service face and asked if she knew where Jenny usually kept the orders.
"Beneath the counter, right there."
She pointed, as though I might be too stupid to see it. I bent down and found a shelf labeled "Reserved." There was only one book on it, a secondhand copy of some teen slasher novel from the 90s. I stood to hand it to her, only to discover that she was standing behind me.
"It's a good thing you had this,"
she whispered, as she slipped the book out of my hand. I shook my head. She was obviously going to tell me whether I wanted to hear it or not.
"I wouldn't have hurt you. No, nothing that easy. I would have just started to scream. And then, when somebody came running, I would have taken your hand, like this."
She gripped my wrist. Her fingers were small, cold, and hideously strong.
"And then I would have plunged this big old knife right into my throat."
The girl smiled up at me.
"Do you know what they do to child murderers in prison?"
Before I could answer, she slipped the massive blade back into the pocket of her apron, picked up the book, and left the store.
"When you see Jenny in hell, tell her that Esme says hi,"
the girl shouted, and then let the door slam behind her. I waited a beat and then ran to alert the authorities. Or at least I tried to. Something odd happened when I reached the display shelves. The floor beneath my feet seemed to stretch somehow. No matter how hard I sprinted, I just couldn't advance. It was maddening and dizzying. I grabbed my knees woozily and then tried to jump forward instead. Nothing. I got the same result from walking backwards, climbing onto the display case or slithering across the carpet with my eyes shut. I wasn't sure which possibility was more horrifying, that I had lost my mind and all of this was in my head, or that I had somehow become a prisoner of Weeping Tree books. I was running out of things to try and it was getting dark. Another book had tumbled from the shelf, but I wasn't going to investigate. Not with the bookstore already so gloomy that I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I had an awful feeling that if I started down one of those aisles, I would turn around to find that the shelves had rearranged themselves and the way back to daylight had been closed off to me forever. With a tense look over my shoulder, I made my way to the door marked staff. I closed it behind me and I lay down in the darkness to wait for morning. I dreamed of black, hairy hands holding me down and cracking open my chest as though it were a book. They peeled away my skin layer by layer, as though each one were a separate page. No matter how much it hurt, however, I just didn't have the strength to escape. My eyes snapped open. I had gotten tangled in the bedsheets. The stuffy little room was still pitch black, but more than just the nightmare had jolted me awake. Something was turning the handle of the door. Blinding light flooded into the room. I threw my hands up in front of my face and screamed. "Oh, forgive the intrusion," Osgood Mosley said and adjusted his tie. "Oh, when I didn't find you at home, I suspected where you might have gone. I suppose you've noticed that you're unable to leave." I thought back to the night before, to the ugly carpet extending beneath my feet, like some sort of horrible gray and green ocean. The memory made my empty stomach roll. I groaned and asked Osgood what the hell he was talking about. "Oh, you're the bookkeeper now. The store will not permit you to exit. Right now I suppose you're imagining yourself tunneling under the floor or breaking out through the ceiling. But whatever you're thinking, I assure you that another bookkeeper's already tried it and failed. The sooner you accept your fate, the better it will be for everyone involved." I didn't want to believe him, but his words carried the weight of a judge's life sentence. If what he was saying was true, all I had left in the world was what I had walked in with. My wallet and keys, a cell phone that didn't work, and a lighter that I still carried, even though I had quit smoking years ago. I clenched my hands into fists and demanded to know how he could have put me in this situation. Wasn't he supposed to be my mother's attorney? "Oh, I never said Jennifer Price was our client," Osgood huffed, sounding hurt. "I said that we've been charged with the execution of her will. In this case, we work at the behest of the Weeping Tree Books Trust Fund. We have a contract with the Chinese restaurant across the plaza. They'll provide you with 3 meals per day and whatever toiletries you need. If there are any other issues, you can inform me when I come by to empty the till each Friday." I fired off one angry question after another, but Osgood just held up his hand. "Oh, I'm really not at liberty to say anything more, although I do suggest that you avoid damaging or angering the store in any way. If you do," the lawyer chuckled, "the expanding carpet will be the least of your worries." I've never been a violent person. Even when things didn't go my way, I was usually able to keep my temper in check. But something about the smirk on that smug lawyer's face made me see red. As I lunged at him, he backed away until he had passed the display case. No matter how hard I swung my fist now, it wouldn't be enough to get at him. The dictionary that I chucked at his head fell at my feet as though I had simply dropped it. "Good luck, Benjamin." Osgood Mosley sighed and then walked out of the door. It was only after he was gone that I noticed the takeout bag on the counter. I had never eaten lukewarm kung pao chicken for breakfast before, but my hunger made it delicious. There was something comforting about the familiarity of the food. It reminded me that no matter how surreal my situation had become, I was still alive and kicking. I had shelter, sustenance, and my faculties intact. I didn't have to go down without a fight. The first order of business was to find the circuit breaker. It turned out to be right behind the door of the staff room. I could have even found it the night before if the shop hadn't been so dim. With the lights finally on, it was time to explore my new prison. By the time that I got to the end of the first aisle, I realized that little wasn't a word that could be applied here. The space was low-ceilinged and narrow, but another room full of shelves expanded to my right and to my left. A steep set of wooden stairs led to still more floors. The rational side of my mind knew that what I was seeing was impossible. There should have been apartments directly above and other stores on either side. But physics didn't seem to matter much inside of Weeping Tree Books. My foot banged against something as I walked. It was the book that had fallen from the shelf the night before. I picked it up and began to read. Benjamin Alexander Hearn didn't know what the little blue book contained, but seeing his own name in it made his stomach queasy. His eyes darted obsessively over the page, completely oblivious to the burning man standing behind him, eager to wrap his charred, bony fingers around his neck. I gasped and looked over my shoulder. The aisle was empty, but I could have sworn that I smelled charcoal in the air. When I glanced back down at the book, its pages were blank. Maybe, I thought queasily, they always had been. The bell above the door clanged, and I was grateful for an excuse to hurry back to the counter. The freckly, curly-haired guy in the doorway fiddled uneasily with the device in his hand while he waited. "It's time for this," he grunted, nudging the cardboard box in front of him with the toe of his boot. When I asked what was inside, he just shrugged. "Hey, don't ask me, man, I just deliver the packages." He squinted hard at me. "Hey, you're new, huh? The lady before was a lot nicer. She always had a pot of tea ready when I stopped by. I technically wasn't supposed to have any because I was on the clock and all, but..." He shrugged again. "She used to say that I reminded her of her son. And do you know what happened to her?" I felt the blood rush from my face. This was too much to handle all at once. I signed for the package, apologized for not having any drinks to offer, and I told him that I would see him next time. "I hope so," he said ominously, and then shouldered back out through the door. Almost reluctantly, I retrieved some scissors from below the counter and opened the box. It contained about 24 secondhand books. 2 were marked as special orders. I thought of Esme and her knife and shivered. The rest bore a note in some weird foreign language. As I looked away from the words, however, they seemed to come into focus. It was as though I could only read them from the corner of my eye. The message they carried was even stranger. "Stock before nightfall," it read. It appeared that I would be exploring the rest of the store sooner than I thought. I loaded the books onto the handcart beside the staff room and headed into the depths of the bookstore, making sure to take a different aisle than I had the first time. It was that quick decision, seemingly unimportant at the time, which ultimately saved my life. As I walked, I became aware of a thin red wire running along the floor. It bent and twisted with the bookshelves, turning at random, and I found myself following it. Since I didn't know where I was going, it didn't matter which route I took. What mattered was being able to find my way back. At first, I thought that Weeping Tree was laid out like a normal bookstore. There were sections for romance, science fiction, history. There was even a kids section. The further I went, however, the more obvious it became that my impression had been wrong. The signs above the aisles, nooks, and reading areas became more bizarre. Cryptozoology, non-Euclidean geometry, alternate futures. Some of the labels were in other languages, pictures, and hieroglyphics. I wished I could stop and browse through some of them, but I was too busy looking for a section where the delivery books might fit. They all seemed to be old biographies of saints, although not from any religion that I'd ever heard of. Sweat ran down my back, my hands were numb from hauling the handcart, and the lights overhead had started to feel like the sun of some sweltering desert. Most disturbing of all, I was no longer sure exactly how long I had been walking. It felt like hours, but it could have been more. The only thing that I was certain of was the red cable I was following along the floor. At some point, I heard a bang from inside the box. I hadn't hit any bumps, yet a book called The Agony of Saint Honora had toppled over. As I put it back in place, it shuddered eagerly in my hand. Stocked before nightfall, the note had said. I wondered what time it was. I picked up my pace, barely pausing to inspect the signs above the sections that I passed. Aruspice, eschatology. I sniffled. That weird, charred smell was back. There was a sort of haze in the air too, as though the shelves were filling with smoke. The Burning Man. The thought crossed my mind seconds before I saw him, a black shade wreathed in fire. Although the flames around him burned white hot, the carpet beneath his feet wasn't even singed, as though this was a special fire meant only for him. A low groaning sound came from his ribcage. It was a noise that bones might make if they could scream. The Burning Man's back was to me, and I prayed that the wheels of the handcart wouldn't squeak as I snuck past his aisle. I rounded a corner and felt the air clear. I had made it, this time. Another angry bang came from inside of the box, reminding me of what I was doing in the depths of the bookstore. A few minutes later, I finally found a section that I thought might fit. Esoteric hagiography. Wasn't that the study of saints? Better yet, the shelves were only about 2/3 full. There was more than enough room to do what I needed to and get back to the front desk before what? The cover of The Agony of Saint Honora lifted slightly, as though something was bashing against it from below. A wail came from within, one that reminded me of a woman crying in pain. I scrambled to cram it onto the shelf, and as I slid it into place, I felt someone's cold fingers slip out from between the pages and brush against my own. With a sinking feeling in my gut, I turned back to the box. A large tome bound in what I hoped was leather had flung itself free and it was rattling on the floor. Inside of a small white-lace booklet, a chant was growing louder and louder. There were other warning signs too, but none of them seemed nearly as urgent as that unholy chorus. It sounded like it was coming from inside of my own skull, and it didn't stop until I put it into place on the shelf. And behind me, the skin-bound tome flipped open. A raw-headed, crimson thing rose out of it, as though climbing from a well. The blood-soaked monk's robes that it wore left no stain on the pages, but when its empty eye sockets met mine, I knew that it was no hallucination. "Sinner," it hissed, pointing a skinless finger directly at me. Other books were struggling to open themselves as well, but there was no time for that now. I had to get away while I still could. I glanced over my shoulder and was horrified to see that where there had been an open aisle behind me, there was now only a sealed wall of bookcases. The flayed monk got down on all fours like an animal, twisted his head around backwards and skittered towards me. I dived out of the way and crawled frantically toward the book that he had come from. As he charged for a second time, I slammed it shut and watched him disappear into thin air. As I slammed his book into place on the shelf, I read its title, The Flaying of Saint Valak. I shelved the rest of the books, beginning with the most active ones, and by the time that it was done, I was panting from the effort. Who the hell would buy one of these awful things? I wondered. And what might they use it for? The clang of the shop's bell reminded me that I would probably find out soon enough. It also reminded me that I was lost in the depths of the store. So lost that it seemed strange to me that I could hear the bell at all. And then I remembered the red cable. It was there all right, even if it wasn't where I had remembered. The path back to the entrance led through an entirely different set of shelves, and along the way, I saw something that chilled me to the core. At the end of one of the aisles, a man hung by a belt from the rafters. He was skeletally thin and pale. It seemed that the rope had just finished what starvation had already begun. The flesh on his fingers had been chewed off, and although I couldn't have said for sure, it seemed like he had done it himself. The second, I took a step toward the poor man's cadaver, and then I realized what recovering it would mean. I would have to leave the safe zone marked by the red cable and cross 4 more corridors. When I turned back around, would I find only another wall of bookcases? Would I wind up wandering helplessly for weeks or even longer, literally eating myself just to keep the hunger at bay? I turned away from the grisly sight and hurried toward the front desk. Even though it felt like I had walked for hours to reach this section, I arrived at the front of the store in less than 2 minutes. The man at the counter cleared his throat. I looked him over nervously. Goatee, piercings, long-length black trench coat. I asked how I could help him. "I need a cookbook," he whispered. When he saw the look on my face, he blushed and added, "My girlfriend says if I don't start pulling my weight around the house, she's gonna kick me out. I'm fine with anything so long as the recipes are easy." It occurred to me that even a shop like this from time to time would be visited by regular folks. I was about to warn him to be careful not to get lost, but the store behind me seemed to have shrunk somehow. The oddly named sections had vanished, and the culinary nook was plain to see. I pointed to it and watched him shuffle away sheepishly. A few minutes later, the bell clanged again. A stocky gray-haired woman in a puffy pink sweater walked through the door. Unlike the young man in the cooking section, she didn't say hello or acknowledge me at all. She just stared from behind her thick, tortoiseshell glasses. Her glare continued even as she waddled past the front desk. Her neck twisted in a way that shouldn't have been possible, not even for a contortionist. I gulped. This was no ordinary customer. Trying to act casual, I slipped out from behind the desk and I walked into the stacks, pretending to be searching for something. As soon as I was out of the woman's line of sight, I planned to tell the young guy in the trench coat something. I still wasn't sure what, to get him out of harm's way. I was rounding the corner of the second set of bookcases when the woman walked out in front of me. She was breathing excitedly through her mouth, which suddenly seemed much wider than it had been a moment ago. Her head moved toward me even though her body hadn't budged. She ran her tongue over wormy violet lips. On the other side, I could see several rows of tiny razor-sharp teeth. Even without words, I understood her warning. Stay put. Don't interfere. As I backed away, I whistled, coughed, and even knocked over a display stand. But none of it was enough to make the young man turn around. I didn't see what happened next, but I heard it. The gasp, the scream choked in blood, the gruesome sound of feasting. The noise reminded me of a pack of hyenas ripping apart a corpse. I stayed frozen behind the front desk until the woman passed by for a second time. Beneath her fluffy pink sweater, her stomach was hideously distended, as though she had just eaten something even larger than she was. She bought a pair of romance novels and a thick purple encyclopedia called Mind-Altering Toxins of the Great Lakes Region. There was still a few flecks of red on her cheeks. I glanced back down the aisles behind her. They extended into the distant darkness once again. The store, it seemed, could rearrange itself based on the customers inside of it. I wondered what else it was capable of. Was it sentient? Or was it just reacting to these stimulus around it, the way that plants in shade incline toward the sunlight? Did my mother also have to learn all of this the hard way, back when she was the bookkeeper? My experiences so far left one thing crystal clear. The store couldn't or wouldn't protect me. I was disposable, just like my mother, the hanging man, and all the other bookkeepers before us. The pork fried rice and oolong teas sitting on the counter had gone cold, but I wolfed them down anyway. As I ate, I thought about the red cable. Someone had found a safe path through the store and put it there, which meant that the previous bookkeepers might have other information to pass down. Information which could help me stay alive inside of this nightmare. The idea hit me with the force of a religious revelation. I shoved aside my food and started turning the staff room upside down. I checked beneath drawers, in the pages of magazines, behind the toilet and inside the lampshade, but I found nothing. And then I looked at the mirror, at my own baby picture still tucked snugly in the corner. If my mother had left anything else important behind, it might be connected to the mirror as well. I lifted it gently from the wall. A thin red journal was taped to the back of it. The first page was blank. The second began with a chilling greeting. "Hello, stranger. My name is Eugene Dodd," it began. "And if you're reading this, then I'm already dead. I know I can't make you believe any of what I've written because for all you know, this journal is just another one of the bookstore's little tricks. Not sure what I mean? You must be new here. Until this place caught me on the night of December 17th, 1948. I was a club drummer with a 2-pack habit and a criminal record for theft, which kept me from getting a straight job. I used to walk past Weeping Tree Books every morning on my way back from gigs, and there was always this pretty brunette sitting on a stool behind the front desk. One morning when I was still drunk from the night before, I decided that I ought to go inside and talk to her. We hit it off right away, and pretty soon we were sharing coffee, donuts, and kisses behind the counter every morning. She was lonely, she said. She had an abuser in her life, one who wouldn't let her go, and she wanted my help. She asked me to bring her a pistol so that she could finally be free. By that point, I would have done anything to help her, so I reached out to some of my contacts and got her what she wanted. You should have seen the smile on her face when I walked in the door that snowy December morning, opened up my coat and showed her the .38. She ran up to me, kissed me deep, and took it out of my hand. Then she told me she was sorry and she used it on herself. I was in shock. Even though there was no way anybody could survive a wound like that, I still tried to go find help, but I couldn't get any closer to the door. When I turned around again, the store had absorbed all that was left of the girl I loved. Even the bullet hole in the wall had disappeared like it was never there. At noon, a guy from the deli around the corner dropped off some sandwiches, collected the trash, and left without a word. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Here's what I've learned in the past few months. Maybe it'll be useful to you. Then again, maybe not. Weeping Tree Books has been around since 1862 at least, but its history probably goes back a lot further than that. I only know that date because of a rolled up newspaper in the pocket of a skeleton that I found. The dead man's clothes were right for the time period, and while I don't know what killed him, something took the time to pluck the teeth out of his skull. The store moves around a lot. I found junk in here from Baton Rouge, London, Hong Kong, and Montreal, just to name a few. Somebody in power is aware of the place's existence, because every now and again 2 government types in black suits come by to scope it out. They never come inside though. They probably know better. Which brings me to the customers. You'll get some average folks here and there, but the majority come to Weeping Tree Books because what's available here can't be found anywhere else. Some of them won't notice your presence at all, and most will ignore you out of respect for the bookstore. And then there are the others, the ones who will want to drink your blood or lay their eggs in your throat, the ones who will want to dissect your thoughts and feed on your fear. For them, you're just a special treat on the way to whatever twisted knowledge they came here to find. I've been lucky so far, but that's the thing about luck, right? Sooner or later, it always runs out. I've been here for over 13 years now, and I can feel myself starting to slow down. I may not be able to get out of this place, but maybe I can take it to hell with me. I asked Mickey over at the deli to bring me a couple of gas cans and a box of matches. All I need now is a spark. And so, stranger, I guess this is goodbye. Maybe these words will go up in smoke along with the rest of this god-awful place. But if they don't and you stumble on this little journal a couple of decades down the line, and don't say I didn't warn you. That was the end of Eugene's handwriting. I thought I finally had an idea about who the Burning Man might have been. Another bookkeeper had picked up where he had left off, and another after that. But there was no time to flip through them now. The dusty bell above the door was ringing. And so it went. There were days when I had no customers, and there were days when the demands of being the bookkeeper left me aching and exhausted. For every ordinary customer, there were a dozen who were more or less than entirely human. Their requests sent me scurrying to the depths of the bookstore, places where the shelves stretched too high to see or where the stairs spiraled down into a cold, damp darkness that seemed to have no bottom. I got to know John, the long-haired teenager who had brought me my meals from the restaurant across the square. He seemed to understand my situation and offered to cook my meals rather than just bringing me leftovers. After trying his attempts at French toast and spaghetti, however, I decided to stick to the menu. In my free time, I read everything that I could get my hands on, but especially the journal that I had discovered behind the mirror. Within its pages, I found a list of the most dangerous customers, along with their physical descriptions and suggestions for how to survive their visits. The squat gray-haired woman made an appearance beside the line. Let her do as she pleases if you want to live. Next came the notes of a bookkeeper named Anna, who had marked the safest route through the store with a red cable. Apparently, she had also set up a blue cable that ran vertically, and a yellow one whose purpose I couldn't guess. Anna's section of the journal ended abruptly with the phrase, "Tomorrow I'll take my stable gun and follow the yellow line all the way to..." The pages beyond had all been ripped out. I had hoped to find something written by my mother among the other bookkeeper's scribblings, but there was no such luck. I checked the back of the baby picture pressed into the corner of the mirror, but there I found only a single mysterious phrase. "I've hidden it in the puzzle book section. No matter what happens, Pigface can't be allowed to have it." I had never seen any sort of puzzle section in the bookstore, and I had no idea who Pigface was. But whatever my mother had written was so important to her that she had used the entire back of the photograph to send her message. And then during my second week at Weeping Tree Books, a customer arrived who would change my life forever. He came in an hour after lunch, and as he walked through the doorway, he smothered the sound of the bell with an enormous hand. Despite his immense size, he moved silently. If I hadn't happened to look toward the front of the store in that precise moment, he could have easily snuck up behind me. He had the kind of bulky, overgrown build that I associated with steroids, but his tanned skin and weather-beaten clothes gave him the appearance of someone who lived on the streets. Weirdest of all was his mask, a pink rubber pig's head that stuck out from beneath his hood. Pigface, I thought, and shuddered. "I'm looking for some stolen property," the huge man rumbled. "It's in here somewhere. I can smell it." When I asked him what title he was searching for, he chuckled. It was like a mountain laughing. There isn't any title, but I'll know it when I see it. I started to tell him that he was free to browse for as long as he liked, but that only got another rumbling giggle. Oh no, Pigface insisted. You're coming with me. He put a hand on my shoulder and pinched. It felt like my arm was about to pop out of its socket. I clenched my teeth to avoid crying out, but it was clear that running away wasn't an option. Pigface, half guided, half pushed me forward into the stacks. I noticed nervously that we weren't taking the safe route, but before I could mention it, we had made another turn and the red cable had disappeared completely. I wondered aloud whether the big man knew what section his stolen property might be in. Just keep walking. He grunted and nudged me toward a downward spiraling staircase that I had never seen before. The list of dangerous customers in the journal hadn't mentioned anyone who looked like this, but that didn't mean much. Whoever had compiled it had only been the bookkeeper for a few months, and the note about Pigface came afterwards. Each sub-basement we passed was disorientingly similar to the first floor. I kept an eye out for Anna's blue cable, but there was no sign of it. Whoever the big stranger was, he seemed to know exactly what he wanted and where he was going. There, Pigface rumbled, pointing to the top shelf of a section marked puzzle books. I was so unnerved by how deep we had gone, and by the fact that I couldn't find my way back, that it took me a moment to react. Pigface gestured irritably to the ladder beside the shelf. I figured he was too heavy to climb up it himself. As reluctant as I was to turn my back on him, I put my boot on the base of the ladder and went to retrieve his stolen property. The top shelf was higher than it had looked from below, and the stranger's large size distorted the dizzying view downward. The ladder wobbled uneasily as I grabbed the book that Pigface was pointing to. It was a beautifully embossed volume that looked like it could have been a collection of fairy tales, and I couldn't resist taking a quick peek inside. I pretended to lose my balance and let the book fall open on the rung in front of me. The page I had flipped to showed a photo of some kind of stone pit, one that had been sealed with rusty bars. It looked real enough to touch. And then a pair of hands reached up from the darkness inside. A young boy pressed his face against the bars, mouthing the word "help." I gasped and turned the page, only to find another pit holding another child. I thought of all the stories I had heard about witches and ogres with big burlap bags who came to drag away the bad kids. If there was any truth to them, it wasn't a stretch to imagine that such a creature might be storing his victims inside of an enchanted book. The ladder trembled. Pigface had grabbed it, and now he was jabbing his finger up at me, ordering me to throw him the book right now. I shook my head and told him that I would be down in a minute. Pigface kicked the ladder. I hugged the rungs with one hand and clutched the book against my chest with the other. It was my only bargaining chip. Once the big man got it, he could do whatever he wanted with me. If I was lucky, I might end up in one of those cells between those beautifully etched pages. I threw myself against the nearest shelf. Its ledge was barely wide enough to support my sweaty fingers. There's nowhere to run. If you come down now, I promise that I'll make it quick. I looked left, right, and then at the perilous drop below. Pigface was right, but I wasn't going to admit it. I scooted along the ledge while he followed down below, waiting for me to give in to the inevitable. He was too big to climb up after me, but I figured it was only a matter of time before he decided to knock over whatever shelf I was clinging to. And what would happen then? I scrambled diagonally and down, making sure to stay beyond the reach of these strangers' freakishly long arms. My eyes darted up to the single incandescent light bulb illuminating this particular nook of the bookstore, and it gave me an idea. I flung the first hardcover I grabbed at the bulb, and when it shattered, I leapt to the floor in darkness. A shower of other books tumbled down behind me, but I didn't hear any sounds of pursuit as I crawled around the corner and got to my feet. I couldn't even hear the big man's breathing. Where had he gone? A hand clamped down on my face. Bet you didn't know that I can see in the dark. Pigface tightened his grip on my face a little, but the pressure was enough to make me scream. His free hand closed around his property and all of the captives within. I sniffed. Shortly after the bulb had shattered, I had become aware of a faint smoky smell wafting through the aisles. I spotted a faint orange flicker. The Burning Man. "Eugene!" I shouted. "Help!" Through a gap in the books, I saw the fiery corpse pause. And then everything seemed to happen at once. Eugene's flame-wreathed spirit careened toward us, crashing into Pigface like a fireball. He let go of me and tumbled backward, howling with rage and pain. I ran without looking back. I could hear the shelves reorganizing themselves, trapping the big man in its depths. The store wasn't protecting me, I realized. It was punishing Pigface for his disrespect. I spotted a staircase to my right, but I didn't dare to take it, not without knowing where I was first. The sounds of Pigface's struggling grew fainter. I slowed down and concentrated my energy on searching for the blue cable, the one that Anna claimed she had used to navigate between levels of the bookstore. 4 staircases later, and I finally found it. I followed it to its meeting point with the red cable, and then back to the front desk of Weeping Tree Books. I slammed the big man's volume onto the counter and opened it, this time from the beginning. That charred smell made me look up before I had even begun. Eugene stood at the far end of the aisle holding something in his hand. He flung it toward me and then walked back into the stacks, leaving behind only a smoky haze and a flickering orange glow. After he had gone, I approached and retrieved it. It was a key. Its tip was black as though dyed by ink, and the sight gave me a mad, impossible idea. And then again, these photos of caged pits, these children trapped between the pages of a book. Wasn't that just as crazy? Maybe an insane problem demanded an insane solution. Working fast, I flipped to the first picture that showed one of those awful prisons. A padlock was clearly visible beside the bars. I lowered the key toward it and felt it sink into the page. I twisted it in the lock and then did the same for each cage on the following pages. I was rewarded by the sight of scampering feet and grinning faces. The children were finally breaking free. At any moment, I expected to see Pigface emerge from the depths of the store, covered with hideous burn wounds and roaring for vengeance, but the bookshop stayed silent. It had swallowed him, just like it had swallowed so many others. I knew that I might never learn the truth about how my mother was ensnared by Weeping Tree Books, or what happened to her afterwards. But after so many years of bitterness, I finally felt at peace with her memory. I had fulfilled her last request, one that she had entrusted me to find in spite of the nightmarish circumstances. In a few hours, John will come by with some egg rolls and shrimp fried rice. I'll read a few more chapters of The Long Goodbye, and then crawl into bed before it gets dark. I've learned the hard way not to wander around the store at night. Tomorrow, I'll begin my search for Anna's yellow cable and the missing pages of Eugene's journal. There's no guarantee that it will lead to an escape from Weeping Tree Books, but I've got all the time in the world to find out. Today's episode is sponsored by Jones Road Beauty. I don't usually talk about makeup on the channel, but I've got to give a shout out to Jones Road Beauty because I've seen firsthand how much my partner loves it. She used to have a whole routine with different products and it always seemed like it took forever. And then she started using Jones Road's Miracle Balm, and now she's ready in no time. It gives her that really natural, healthy look instead of looking like she's wearing a ton of makeup. She even uses it as a blush, bronzer, highlighter, and lip tint, so it's replaced several products in her routine. She also recently started using Jones Road's new foundation stick, and she's been raving about it. It gives her a little more coverage when she wants it, but it still looks really natural and never heavy or cakey. Plus, it's made with skin-loving ingredients, so it actually nourishes your skin while you wear it. If somebody in your life is looking for clean, high-performing makeup that's quick and easy to use, check out Jones Road Beauty. Right now, you'll get a free full-sized mascara with your first purchase when you use code MrCreeps at checkout at jonesroadbeauty.com. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them, so please let them know that our show sent you. Whenever a new client walks into Weeping Tree Books, I've learned to just smile. Ignoring people can be seen as a dangerous lack of respect, but drawing attention to yourself by talking can be even more deadly. A nice quiet smile is the best middle ground. Most of the time, the customers even smile back, although some of them might just be showing off their extra teeth. Occasionally, people come in for a gift or something to read on vacation. Others are just curious about the little courtyard bookshop with a willow tree out front. I do my best to watch out for those ordinary folks while they're here. If the shelves start to rearrange themselves or the signs above the aisles turn strange, I gently call their attention in the opposite direction. Most of the time, I just make something up. Did you know about the special 30% off sale? Are you a member of our exclusive book club? Weeping Tree Books doesn't need to sell a single volume to stay in operation, and it certainly doesn't offer any memberships, but the minor annoyance is usually enough to get people oriented away from danger. Then there are the other customers, the ones with a sheen of cold sweat who look like they haven't slept in weeks. The ones who appear normal until I look at them out of the corner of my eye and see something that belongs in a child's nightmare. Those clients always seem to know exactly what they're looking for. I've been the bookkeeper at Weeping Tree Books for over 3 months now, and in all that time, I've never once set foot out the door. The lawyer who got me into this mess warned me that every attempt I made to escape would fail. And he was right. My predecessor, Anna, ran color-coded cables along the floor of the bookstore to show which paths were safe. I had hoped that one of them, the yellow one, would show a path out. As I followed it, however, I noticed something disturbing. The ceiling seemed to be getting lower as I went. The aisles grew narrower, and even the books themselves were smaller. When I banged my head against a light fixture, I couldn't deny it any longer. I was being led into some sort of tunnel. 20 minutes later, I was crawling on my knees. The volumes lining the shelves around me were as small as post-it notes. I was slithering on my belly when the corridor finally opened up into a larger room, and that's where I found the bodies. 1 woman and 2 children. Their clothing was from another era, but their wounds were so fresh that they might have been butchered only moments before. The cuts had been made by a small blade and maybe a pocket knife, and I could still see the shock and fear in the poor boy's wide, glassy blue eyes. The woman was clutching something in her hand, a heart-shaped locket that held black and white photos of herself and another man. EKS read the initials beneath her name. ALM read his. Whoever ALM was, his body was nowhere to be found in the gruesome menagerie around me. Meanwhile, the aisle up ahead was even tighter, and unlit by a single light bulb. As I approached, I would have sworn that I felt a warm, moist wind, like someone's breath blowing out of it. I wasn't going to follow the yellow cable a single step further. Even if freedom was on the other side, I knew that there was no way I could force myself to move ahead into that narrow, suffocating, hungry darkness. Since then, I've accepted my fate. I told myself that I get 3 warm meals a day and a place to sleep. and that there are plenty of people who do worse work for a lot less. I could have gone on believing that forever, if it hadn't been for a girl named Amy. I met her a few days after Thanksgiving. It was a slow afternoon with no deliveries to stock and a cold rainstorm battering down in the courtyard outside. Even the willow tree looked miserable. I would have been almost grateful to be trapped inside the warm and dry bookstore if my dinner hadn't been taking so long to arrive. John Wei, the teenage fry cook at the Chinese restaurant across the plaza, was the one who had provided my meals. He was usually so on time and prepared that I had never even considered what might happen if one day he just didn't show up. Since I was unable to leave Weeping Tree Books, I had no other way to feed myself and no guaranteed visitors apart from the lawyer who came by each Friday to collect the week's profits. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder at the stacks, something that I usually tried not to do, especially if I felt like I was being watched. But hunger and nervousness had altered my routines. The safest part of Weeping Tree Books was where I sat, right between the front desk and the staff room where I slept. Yet I found myself pacing the aisles, flipping irritably through one cheesy romance novel after another. Where the hell was John? Someone cleared the throat behind me. Startled at first, I relaxed when I turned all the way around. There he was, a slicked back black hair, a mischievous smile, and a steaming plastic bag of Chinese takeout in his hand. Finally, I sighed. I was starting to get worried. The words died in my throat as I realized that I hadn't heard the dusty bell above the front door ring as John walked in. Whatever was standing in front of me held out the bag of food and smiled even wider. It hadn't blinked once. I backed away slowly and it matched my speed. I turned to run and it opened its mouth wide. And the dusty bell above the bookshop door clanged. I blinked. There was no uncanny duplicate of John Wei lurching toward me, opening its mouth constrictor wide to swallow me whole. Either I had imagined the whole thing or whoever had walked into the store had just saved my life. Ben? A tense female voice called out. This is for you. John's sick. He asked me to bring your dinner over. With her red nose and puffy eyes, the girl standing at the front desk wasn't exactly a picture of health herself. She set a bag of food down on the counter, stepped back a good distance, and sneezed into her scarf. Now that I was over my shock, it was clear that I was looking at a slimmer, more feminine version of John. I'm Amy, the girl explained. John's older sister. I nodded, completely forgetting to say thank you. It took me a moment to realize that Amy hadn't waved goodbye and left. She was still watching me curiously, hands stuffed into her pockets while she rocked on her heels. So, long shift, huh? She commented, looking at the empty bookstore and the ticking clock above the staff room door. The longest, I grinned. Sometimes it feels like it'll never end. I fumbled for something to say and then added, I didn't know John had a sister. That got a laugh. Oh, we might look alike, but we don't exactly get along, and besides, I was away at college until recently. Amy blushed, suddenly looking like she would have preferred to be almost anywhere else. Well, see you around, I guess. I spiced up your dinner a bit. Hope you like it. With a final sneeze into her scarf, Amy hurried back out into the rain. I wasn't sure what she had done to my chicken, but it was the best thing that I had eaten in weeks. As I stared into the darkness of the staff room that night, I found myself hoping that it would take John a while to recover. The next day dawned less rainy but just as gloomy. I was disappointed to find that Amy had left my breakfast on the doorstep earlier that morning. I told myself that she must have woken up early to get a head start on her college work, It was better than the possibility that she was avoiding me. Around 11, a large shipment of botany guides arrived and had to be stocked, which meant that I had missed Amy's lunchtime visit too. And then in the afternoon, a customer had arrived who drove John's sister from my mind completely. He was bald and well-built, wearing a brown leather coat and jeans that looked like he had just bought them off the rack. He gave me a brief nod when he came through the door, and he headed directly to the depths of the shop. And that set off my alarm bells immediately. If there was one thing that I was sure of, it was that the further one ventured from the front desk, the stronger the strangeness became. I hurried after the guy to warn him, only to find that he had disappeared. Unlike most of the other ordinary clients, the guy seemed to know the layout of the place already. But when he still hadn't reappeared after 2 hours, I started to get worried. It was a relief when I finally heard his quick steps coming down the aisle, but I did wonder what he had been up to for so long back there. "Find what you were looking for?" I asked. Not today," the guy shrugged, and then left without another look back. Not today. It was an odd comment, most of all because it implied that he would be back. Weeping Tree Books rarely had repeat clients, although whether that was due to amnesia of the shop or just due to the fact that there wasn't much in stock for regular humans, I couldn't have said. Half an hour after the man in the leather jacket left, there was another odd occurrence, one that might have meant everything or nothing. A 20-something redhead in a black overcoat entered the plaza, walked around it in a slow, deliberate circle, and then left. He might have been lost, but he wasn't following the navigation on any phone, nor did he ask anybody in the nail salon next door for directions. I couldn't shake the feeling that his weird behavior and the man in the brown jacket were related, but I had no idea how. I was still mulling it over when Amy arrived with my dinner. Once again, she hesitated before walking out the door. Sorry I left in such a hurry yesterday. It's just when we started talking about school." Amy took a deep breath. The truth is that I quit. The work, the pressure, it was just too much. Everyone is kind and sympathetic in telling me to take my time, but I can tell they're disappointed. My parents, they had so much invested in me, And now... "Hey, at least you're not stuck working in a bookstore for the rest of your life," I offered. "I guess it's true. There are always worse places you could be." Amy perked up. "Have you got any recommendations?" How could I tell her that the last book I had flipped through was over a century old, written in symbols rather than letters, and appeared to be about how to manipulate the weather? And before that, I tried to find some relaxing images of nature in a photo guide for the modern hunter. Only the first picture, however, had been taken in the woods. It showed a small house at twilight with the lights on. The photos that followed were just more shots of the same house, closer and closer each time. I quit when the photographer seemed to crawl through the kitchen window. And then there was a little volume called Your Erotic Journey. And the short stories it contained were always uncannily similar to whatever the reader was fantasizing about at the time, which would have been great if it wasn't for the dreams. They were lush, vivid, and followed the stories exactly, apart from their gruesome endings. For weeks afterwards, I woke up shivering, my head full of beautiful faces, with ink-black eyes and the lingering sensation of my limbs severed one by one while I was still alive. "Nope," I replied to Amy's question. "Nothing comes to mind." It was the beginning of our friendship. From that day forward, Amy stayed and chatted for a while whenever she dropped off my meals. I wasn't sure what she saw in me, but I was grateful for the company. Maybe I thought she just needed somebody outside of her family to talk to. When my mother Jennifer was a bookkeeper, she had kept a hot plate and a kettle of tea for visitors. I tried to live up to her tradition, but apart from the occasional friendly delivery driver, I hardly ever had any visitors. Amy's presence made that December a happy and hopeful time for me, or at least as happy and hopeful as any time can be in a place like Weeping Tree Books. Knowing that we would see each other again made my daily grind more bearable, but all that daydreaming also distracted me, making me overlook things whose importance I wouldn't understand until it was already too late. The man in the brown jacket returned often, and each visit was longer than the last. After he gave me the slip for a second time, however, I gave up on trying to follow him or discover what he was doing. And there was something familiar, too, about the young red-headed guy who would stop to stare into the display window for a few minutes, but I barely noticed him. I had more bigger things to think about, and the most urgent was, how was I going to tell her? It was clear from the way that Amy snuggled close to me while we talked and brushed her fingers against mine that we were becoming more than friends. What would happen if she wanted to go see a movie together or take a walk in the park? If I had told her the truth, she would think that I was insane. If I stalled, she would eventually get tired of waiting and move on. The turning point came on Christmas Eve. Amy had brought over a string of colored lights and asked if she could put them up in the bookshop window to make the place more festive. I agreed, and not wanting to admit that I was unable to walk past the display shelf to help. She was still working when the man in the brown jacket strode out of the door, as businesslike as ever. Suddenly, Amy paused. "What is it?" "I think I know that guy," she muttered. "From my PhD program." "No, it can't be. Jacob wouldn't be caught dead in a leather jacket." Until that moment, I hadn't realized that Amy had been just as elusive about her time at college as I was about my work at the bookstore. What had she studied? Why had she quit? That night, when she came back with a 3-course meal and a bottle of wine to share in the glow of the festive lights, those questions were the last thing on my mind. Amy wound up spending the night with me. I made up all sorts of excuses to justify why I was allowing her to stay without warning her about the bookstore's dangers, but the simple and selfish truth was that I wanted her more than I cared about the potential consequences. We drifted off to sleep in each other's arms and woke to the sound of crying outside the door. "What's that noise?" Amy mumbled groggily, and then sat up and felt around for her clothes in the dark. "It sounds like some kid is hurt." Of course. I was used to the nocturnal noises of the bookstore. Grumbles, shouts, and distant conversations. The haunting, distant songs of a choir. The rowdy chaos of a party. Sometimes I thought that I recognized the voices, but more often they just sounded like incoherent gibberish. There were metallic groans and reverberating clangs, as though the store itself was stretching out after a long day. But this screeching infant was something new, and just like Amy had said, it sounded like an abandoned child. The staff room was pitch dark, and I didn't realize what Amy was doing until I heard her zip up her sweater. "Hey, where are you going?" I whispered. "There's a kid in trouble out there," she grunted. "We've got to do something." I tried to argue that the noise was coming from the apartments up above, and that she couldn't possibly be hearing what she thought she was hearing inside of a closed-down bookstore. But Amy refused to listen. "When John was little, I went out to the backyard while I was supposed to be watching him. I'm not even sure why I did it, but when I got back, he had knocked a glass bowl onto the floor and sliced his foot wide open. He was bawling his eyes out just like that. You can stay if you want, but I'm going." While I fumbled around for more excuses, Amy found the light switch and opened the staff room door. It was around 3 a.m., the blackest hour of the night, and the concrete plaza outside was covered by a fine layer of snow. The crying seemed to be coming from 2 or 3 aisles away, and Amy was already hurrying toward it. A heap of white sheets lay between the shelves. Something wiggled underneath. "Amy, stop!" I hissed, grabbing her wrist. She had dragged me halfway down the aisle toward the pile when the wrongness of the whole thing finally seemed to dawn on her. The bookstore's eerie yellowish lights, the lateness of the hour, the presence of that squirming bundle, with no sign of how it had come to be there or why. Whatever was beneath the blanket must have noticed our presence as well. After a few more half-hearted cries, it had stopped whimpering. It was waiting for us to come closer. When no one moved, the bundle of white cloth inched tentatively in our direction. Amy took a nervous step back, and suddenly it was scrambling toward us with a predator's speed, crying not from pain but from the thrill of the hunt. Amy and I crashed into each other in our mad dash for the staff room door. We closed and barricaded it behind us, but I wasn't sure if it would be enough. I usually survived the nights in Weeping Tree Books by laying low and not drawing attention to myself, not by having some sort of defense system. Something slammed against the door hard enough to rattle it. Amy and I braced it with our backs and felt the second slam reverberate through our bones. I didn't think the hinges could survive a third blow. The bookstore fell silent, and then we heard it, a low moaning cry, trying to lure us out once more. After what felt like an eternity, it gave up, or at least seemed to. The only noise was the rumble of the heating system and our own panting, frightened breaths. What the hell was that? I told Amy everything. If there was ever a time that she might believe me, it was now. To my surprise, she accepted the whole story at face value. As some of the stuff you're describing reminds me of the scary stories that my grandmother used to tell. She used to swear that they were true, and she was no fool. Besides, Amy added, the idea of a bookstore that defies the laws of physics, it's actually not too far off from what I was studying. Amy explained that Dr. Balash, her thesis mentor, specialized in the study of anomalies in physics. Places where gravity seemed to work the wrong way, or that it measured larger on the inside than on the outside. He saw himself as a champion for truth, disproving what he considered to be crackpot conspiracy theories and bad science. I always got the impression that Dr. Balash actually had two lines of research, a public one that he shared with the world, and a private one that was limited to just a few of his preferred students, like Jacob. At the time, I felt awful about not being admitted to his inner circle, but looking back, I'm almost grateful. The more time that passes, the more it feels like a cult. There was no way that Amy and I were getting back to sleep after what we had just experienced, so we talked until we saw daylight through the crack beneath the door. When Amy yanked it open, I held the chair at the ready just in case. But there was nothing on the other side apart from an abandoned white sheet and some fresh, fingernail-sized scrapes on the door. If you don't want to come back, I told Amy. Trust me, I understand. Are you kidding? Amy shook her head. This is the most incredible thing that I've ever seen, and it was right across from my parents' restaurant all along. For an awful moment, I feared that the store would trap Amy on her way past the display case, just as it did for me. But then she was out in the snowy plaza, waving at me through the cheerful lights that she had hung up in the bookshop window. She headed back toward the restaurant to get to our breakfast, and I put some water in the kettle for our tea. I was about to turn the hot plate on when all hell broke loose. The dusty bell swung wildly as a boot crashed into the front door of Weeping Tree Books. It was the man in the brown leather jacket with a gun pressed against Amy's head. The young red-headed guy followed after him, along with a short-haired woman in round spectacles who I had never seen before. "Jesus, Jacob," Amy screamed. "What the hell are you doing?" The man called Jacob gestured at me with his pistol. "Do as you're told and nobody gets hurt," he snapped. I lifted my hands. The whole thing felt unreal, like I was playing a part in some old movie. "There isn't much in the till," I informed him, "but you can have it all." The redhead and the woman in the glasses looked at each other and laughed. Money? You think we're after money? Jacob jabbed his pistol toward the interior of the bookstore. There's stuff in there that's worth more than all the silver and gold in the world combined. But you know that already, don't you? I want you two lined up 10 feet ahead of me on the blue cable. We're gonna take a little stroll. If one of you tries to run, I shoot the other. How's that for a deal? I followed Jacob's orders, trying to arrange my thoughts. Although our captor made a big show of waving the pistol around, I could tell from the tense and practical way that he held it that he wasn't used to firearms. He was, however, aware of the blue cable that served as a guide through the dark fathoms of the bookstore. I wondered how much more he knew. Before long, the plaza outside the window disappeared from view. Wherever Jacob was taking us, I had a feeling that it would be a while before we got there. How long had his last trip into the bookstore last? 6 hours, even more. Did Dr. Balash put you up to this? Amy had asked. And Jacob answered right away, forgetting his own orders to keep silent. Balash, he snorted. You've got to be kidding me. He's been hoarding information on places like this for years, and he never once considered how useful it might be. When I think about all the hours that I spent under his thumb, calibrating instruments and doing research that would never see the light of day, well, Jacob smirked. All that wasted time did have one benefit. I met you. What are you talking about? Amy demanded. Places like this leave an electromagnetic residue that Dr. Balash's tools are designed to measure. You didn't notice, but when you walked into his office for the first time, all the gauges went off the charts. Otherwise, I never would have been able to convince him to admit you into the program. Jacob laughed at Amy's stunned silence. What? You thought you made it into a top physics program at a top university on merit alone? The only thing Balash and the rest of us wanted from you was this location, and now we've got it. He waved his pistol around as though trying to reassert his authority. Now keep walking. Although I ventured into the depths of Weeping Tree books every day, I never quite got used to the experience. Those endless aisles of ugly carpet, those glowing incandescent light bulbs set just far enough apart to create pools of shadow. Those shoddy particle board shelves that seemed to move whenever they weren't being watched. And above all, the lingering, inescapable sensation that something was following, on the ceiling, around a corner, somewhere just out of sight. Most people couldn't stand it for more than a few minutes, but Jacob and his crew hardly seemed to notice. I wondered whether it was because they had been in places like this before, or if they were just too fixated on finding whatever they were looking for to notice. My legs were beginning to ache by the time that we encountered the red cable at the top of a spiral staircase. Here, Jacob informed the others. His crew stopped, placed their black backpacks on the floor and paused for a break. Jacob tossed Amy and I a water bottle and some energy bars. You see, I'm not a monster, not as long as you both cooperate. We ate in silence and then continued down the stairs. That oppressive feeling of being observed only grew stronger. It was as though we were passing through the entrails of some enormous beast. I knew from experience that the further one wandered from the main floor, the less stable and more dangerous Weeping Tree books became. But were Jacob and his crew aware of that fact? The way they had taken out flashlights and rope during our break suggested that they were, but I doubted this trio of graduate students fully understood what they were getting themselves into. Still, it raised an uncomfortable question. If Jacob didn't need us to help him navigate the bookstore, then why had he brought us along at all? I lost count of how many floors we passed. Some were lit by cheery lights, without a single book in a language that I couldn't identify. Others were all dark wood shelves and dusty tomes, as gloomy and ominous as the inside of an anglerfish's mouth. The steps had changed as well. becoming wide concrete slabs or narrow wooden slats, depending on the level that we were passing. Each time I rounded a corner, I expected some unknowable horror to leap up and drag me into the darkness, but the monster that I was expecting never came. Maybe, I thought, as I listened to Jacob mutter to one of his accomplices, we had brought the monsters in here with us. My one comfort was the presence of the red cable, winding its way down the central column of the staircase like some endless crimson serpent. I took advantage of the distraction to look back at my captors, and at Amy. She was drumming her fingers nervously on her jeans. Behind her, Jacob and the redhead were inspecting a small silver device and nodding at one another. The woman with glasses had taken over the gun and aimed it unwaveringly at Amy and I. Unlike Jacob, it was clear from her stance and trigger control that she knew what she was doing. Phones and internet didn't work inside of Weeping Tree Books, but the device in the redhead's palm seemed simpler than that, almost like a mercury thermometer for supernatural activity. I realized that it was probably the same device that I had seen him using in the plaza several days earlier, and while I couldn't imagine what it might be pointing to, we seemed to be almost there. Black and white were the only colors on the next floor. The surgically bright fluorescent lights were a far cry from the cozy, incandescent bulbs that I was used to, and the polished tile floor gave the place the ambience of a sinister hospital. The shelves were all white metal, and binders lining them were all the same identical shade of black. With my red sweater and khaki pants, I felt like an invader as we exited the stairwell. Suddenly, I wanted very badly to hold Amy's hand, or anybody's hand for that matter. This didn't seem like a place where humans should go. Jacob cleared his throat. I got moving. There was no text on the shelves here, nor any indication of where we should go apart from the redhead's weird device. I kept glancing back at the stairs, hoping that they wouldn't just disappear. The total silence magnified the echo of pages turning up ahead. Jacob nodded to the woman in glasses, who lowered her pistol slightly as we crossed into the next aisle. The man in the center turned around like he had been expecting us. His striped pants, suspenders, and white-collared shirt had probably been stylish about 100 years ago, but now they were in tatters. He wore his wide-brimmed hat pulled low, hiding his face from view, but something about his mustache and sideburns seemed familiar. "Arthur Lane Mackle?" Jacob inquired. The man smiled, revealing hideously receded purplish black gums. The name triggered something in my memory, that ever-tightening aisle, the corpses, the locket, ALM. Arthur Lane Mackle. I was looking at the last living member of that butchered family, although I wasn't sure living was the right word. His skin was pale as death, and the stuff flowing through the veins underneath looked more like ink than blood. "I brought what you asked for," announced Jacob. "Good lad," Arthur cackled. "Here." He rasped, pulling one of the black binders free and ripping out a page. "This one might interest you. On the fabrication of plagues, written by a 16th century warlock. Very rare, very effective, and very valuable to the people up there, I'm sure." The paper that he handed to Jacob seemed to be a map of sorts, a guide from this room to a specific shelf in the bookstore. I noticed something else as well. The bumps on the spine of the binder and along the shelves weren't any accident. They were braille. "I understand why you wanted us to bring you the girl," Jacob commented as he pocketed the paper. "It must be awfully lonely down here. But what about him?" Arthur chuckled. "Would you believe that I actually volunteered to be the bookkeeper? I was 26 and the Great War was on, and we couldn't risk the enemy gaining access to the anomalous places like this one. I thought that I had the stomach for it. I even moved my family in here with me. I thought that one little bookstore couldn't possibly be worse than the battlefields that I had seen in France. But I was wrong. Arthur circled around me. Something about this place brought my memories to life. The foes that I had killed, the friends I had lost. I could see them, smell them, hear their screams because in a way, I had brought them in here with me too. And as you all know, there was no escape. Day after day, year after year, it was that sort of torture that drives a man to consider insane possibilities and do awful things, even to the people that he loves. I offered up my wife and child to any power in this accursed place that could free me from my role as a bookkeeper. And you know what? Something answered. Its promise was a trap. I should have known better than to imagine that I would ever be allowed to leave. Instead of the bookkeeper, it transformed me into the codex. I know the location of every volume in Weeping Tree books, and yet I cannot read a single one. Arthur removed his hat, revealing a pair of black pits where his eyes had once been. I'm sure you've got quite a lovely set of peepers yourself, lad. You two, hold him. I don't want us struggling to damage those lovely green eyes. Jacob and the redhead moved to grip my arms, and then everything seemed to happen at once. Amy grabbed a binder, chucked it at the girl in glasses, and bolted. The girl in glasses fired her pistol. Her shot went wide and hit the thing that had once been Arthur Lane Mackle in the gut. A viscous black liquid, like ink, oozed from his wound onto the tile. But the codex barely seemed to notice. He was focused on me and acquiring the pair of eyes that he had been promised. Before the girl in glasses could re-establish her aim, I dashed in the opposite direction from Amy. It would be harder to catch both of us, I figured, and eventually I could circle back around, provided of course that I didn't get lost or caught. The codex might not have been able to see, but my running footsteps were enough for him to pinpoint my location. He, Jacob, and the girl in glasses were hot on my heels. Only the redhead appeared to have gone after Amy. Another shot rang out, punching a hole in a binder just beside my left leg. I had gotten lucky 2 times, but I doubted that there would be a third. I was raising my arms to surrender when a shriek made me spin around. The codex had snapped the neck of the girl with glasses, and now it was turning on Jacob, pinning him to the shelves with one hand and reaching toward his face with the other. I looked away in time to avoid witnessing what he did, but I couldn't blot out the fleshy sound of an eyeball being plucked from its socket. And then another. The codex had no intention of helping me or Jacob, I realized. All it wanted was its sight restored and a fellow prisoner with whom to pass the time. The terrible knowledge that he had promised to Dr. Balash's students had never been anything more than a distraction. Behind me, the codex was laughing, a dry, rasping sound that couldn't entirely drown out Jacob's agonized groans. The colors, they're so beautiful. I ran through the endless aisles, shouting Amy's name. The only response was the echoing footsteps of the codex, approaching faster and faster behind me. I swerved left and right, hoping to lose him, but it was hopeless. This labyrinth was his domain, and I could no longer even guess in which direction the stairs might lie. A hand shot out from the next aisle. Amy pushed me up against the shelves and pressed a finger to my lips. Even faster footfalls were approaching from our left. You little, the redhead roared. Get back here. He charged right past us and then stopped dead. He had come face to face with the codex. There were sounds of a scuffle of fists and boots connecting with flesh. It ended with a strangled cry. Amy was already pulling me in the opposite direction. I found something, she whispered. Come on. Another right, another left, and then I saw it. A torn-off yellow cable dangling from a shaft in the wall. I thought back to Anna, the bookkeeper who had first placed the cables into her final torn-out journal entry. She hadn't been following the yellow cable to the exit. She had been following it to the codex, hoping that even as a captive of the bookstore himself, he might know a way out. It was possible that I really hadn't imagined the sensation of something breathing at the other end of the narrow tunnel during my own escape attempt. He might have been there all along, waiting eagerly for another chance to steal a pair of eyes. "I know where this leads," I told Amy, "but I should probably go first, just in case." We took one last look around the black and white maze of Weeping Tree Books, a record room. The quiet was unsettling. Where had the codex gone? Was he still busy with what was left of Jacob and his crew? I heaved myself up the cable and into the claustrophobic space, which was about as wide around as an air duct. Dragging myself forward into the dark with a single arm outstretched, I felt like a foolhardy caver. What would I do if I got stuck or if the space closed in around me? I bent around a spine-cracking corner and finally saw light at the end of the tunnel. I recognized the room ahead and those 3 innocent victims as freshly dead as if Arthur Mackle had killed them only a few minutes before. As I scrambled free of the narrow space, I could hear Amy still struggling in the tunnel behind me. I warned her not to look too closely at the room that she was about to see. She had just rounded the hairpin turn when her eyes widened. Without warning, she slipped backward. "He's got me," Amy yelped. I grabbed her arms and pulled. Amy screamed, caught in a painful tug-of-war, one that I knew I would lose. I could feel the muscles in my legs starting to give out. The codex had more hateful strength in a single hand than I had in my whole body. And then, with a snap and a grunt, Amy slipped free and came crashing out onto my chest. I almost didn't want to inspect the damage. What if her foot had been torn off, or worse? A bruising, bloodied handprint covered Amy's bare ankle, but the only thing missing was her sock and sneaker. The codex didn't come crawling out of that awful tunnel after us, probably because he was a prisoner of the records room, just as I was a prisoner of the rest of the store. A fact which made me realize exactly how much Arthur Mackle's bitter sacrifice had cost him. Rather than being trapped for one lifespan in the bizarre bookstore, he was trapped for eternity in a single room, a room that up until now he had been unable to even see. "Are you all right?" I asked Amy. "No, but I'll live." Amy limped to a standing position and draped her arm around my shoulders. Side by side, we limped back to the front desk of Weeping Tree Books. "What are you going to do now?" It was the morning after New Year's Eve. Amy and I sat at the counter of Weeping Tree Books and watched a freezing wind blow across the plaza outside. I hoped she couldn't hear the nervousness in my question. Amy watched the steam rising from her cup of tea for a long time before she spoke. "I don't know," she sighed. "I think that I want to finish my doctorate. Now that I know for a fact that places like this exist, how can I not be a little bit curious? And maybe during my research I'll find a way to, to get me out of here." She didn't say it out loud, but I knew that she was thinking it. I nodded and tried to smile. I mean, what else could I do? We had been through a lot together, but how could I ask her to be with me? A man who was trapped in this place until the moment of his own gruesome death. You should have seen the looks on my parents' faces when I told them that all those cuts and bruises were from a car accident on Christmas Eve. Amy rambled on, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. "Oh, I thought they were going to kill me." As soon as I said that I was going back to school, though, it was applause and hugs and sweets all around. At least it stopped them from asking any more questions. I could see her point. I hated to think how the Way family would react if they discovered that the bookstore across from their restaurant was an ugly gash in the laws of physics. As far as they or anybody else knew, Weeping Tree Books was a normal store and I was a normal employee, albeit one with very odd hours. Giving others more information than that was dangerous for them, and for me. I had taken that risk with Amy already and it had almost gotten us both killed. The knowledge of Amy's imminent departure hung over our conversation like a toxic cloud. For the first time that winter, we both seemed glad when it was time for her to return to the restaurant. I gave her a rushed and awkward hug goodbye, and I watched through the display window as she trudged back across the plaza, her face stuffed into her scarf to avoid the roaring wind. As cold as it looked, I would have given anything to be out there with her. The last time that I had tried to escape from Weeping Tree Books, a slowly tightening corridor had nearly squeezed the life from me. I had been grateful just to get back to the front of the store with my life. I had accepted my fate. But then I met Amy. There had to be a way out. I couldn't just accept spending the rest of my life here, could I? It was an odd winter. I watched a slush drip from the branches of the willow tree in the courtyard outside, daydreaming of an escape. The store was quiet, and the only customers were 2 or 3 who I had come to identify as regulars. Esme, the cheerful blonde child who had threatened to kill with a knife on my first day, a young woman in thick glasses and a black turtleneck sweater who never spoke, and a guy that I had come to identify as a Mothball Man. With his blue, pinstriped suit and slicked back hair, he reminded me of a local news anchor, but he had this smell to him. It reminded me of dissection day in science class, or the stuff that was used to keep bugs away from clothes. I wondered if he worked in a chemical plant or something. One cloudy evening around the end of February, Mothball Man hesitated by my counter after making his purchase. "It's almost time, you know," he hissed. "And Jenny was wise enough to prepare. I hope you will be too." Mothball Man's voice was wispy and desiccated. It didn't match his burly frame at all, but that wasn't what chilled my blood. It was the fact that he had mentioned my mother's name. She had been the bookkeeper at Weeping Tree before me, but apart from a few notes that I found behind the employees-only door, I had nothing left from her. No clue of how she had survived for so long in this place. Mothball Man slid a business card across the counter to me. "Lars Heerhoven," it read. "Pesticide specialist." "Oh, they're coming soon." Lars's wheezy voice grew even softer. His eyes darted along the bookshelves. "Can't you feel it?" I glanced up to ask what he meant, but the bell above the door was already ringing as Lars walked out into the deepening night. I scratched my head. I had learned not to focus too much on what the customers said. Insane rambling, lies, and knowledge that I would have been better off without. I was used to all of it, but this was the first time that a customer had tried to sell me something. "They're coming. Can't you feel it?" And what the hell had he been talking about? As I began to close up, I heard laughter from the self-help section. I sighed, and they would probably go on for hours, but by now I knew better than to peek around the corner to see what was so funny. The following morning, I had another unusual experience, one that I might have brushed off if it hadn't been for Mothball Man's warning. While shelving some photo collections from a war that didn't seem to have happened yet, I had to rearrange some older albums on the shelves. As I did so, I saw something squirming between the pages. Against my better judgment, I flipped through the book, trying to find it again. It looked like some sort of hairy black and yellow worm, but when I leaned in close, it coiled up like a striking snake. I realized that the things that I had taken for hairs could just as easily have been spines, and that what had looked like a hollow, pit-like mouth was actually lined with thousands of tiny teeth. Whatever the thing was, it had been gnawing tunnels through all those gritty black and white photos. Disgusted, I slammed the thick volume shut, but I didn't hear the satisfying crunch that I was expecting. When I reopened the page that I had left, the weird little critter was gone. That night, I dreamed about Lars Heerhoven, the guy that I had come to know as Mothball Man. We were standing on bare concrete in some vast, dark space. There was a circle of light around us, but I couldn't see what was casting it. Lars approached me with a grim smile. In his hand was a small box about the size of an alarm clock. "Only scatter it around what you want to keep. There isn't much time," Lars repeated. "And after tonight, I won't be back. So what do you say?" I asked Lars what he wanted in return. He laughed and unbuttoned his suit. Underneath, his skin was leathery and mummified. 2 years. How does that sound?" he rasped. "Without my help, you won't even last another week." Lars took a step closer. "You met one of them, didn't you? I can see it in your eyes. How would you like to meet a few dozen, or maybe a few million? Those little teeth can chew through flesh just as well as they can chew through paper, you know." I felt a crawling sensation on my arm, as though a tiny, hair-covered worm was wiggling up it. When I smacked it away, there was nothing there. It finally dawned on me that I was dreaming, but slapping myself awake wasn't going to cut it. My hammering heartbeat, the sweat running down my neck, it all felt so real. I glanced at my arm. There was a spot of blood where my hand had grazed it, as though I had crushed a mosquito there. "What do you say?" Lars repeated. Before I realized what was happening, he reached out from my open wound with an empty file in his hand. I sat up in the employee's room with a gasp. There was a rust-colored stain on the bedsheets beneath my right arm, and a familiar-looking box on the nightstand. I suddenly felt a couple of years older. I nervously fiddled with the corners of the box. Was it really the one from my dream? It had the same dull grayish-beige color, and despite the importance that Lars had given to it, it hardly seemed to weigh anything at all. I thought about Pandora as I lifted the flimsy cardboard lid. Inside was a yellowish powder. I brushed my fingers against it and they burned. I sprang back with a yelp, but the painful sensation didn't stop until I had wiped away every grain of the stuff. I realized uncomfortably that it smelled an awful lot like Mothball Man himself. What was it that Lars had said? "Only scatter it around what I wanted to keep." I made a note to ask John Way to pick up some rubber gloves, but to my surprise, he wasn't the one who had brought over my evening meal. As overjoyed as I was to see Amy, all I could think of to say was an awkward, "Oh, what are you doing here?" "Oh, I have a 3-day weekend, so I figured," she trailed off. "Didn't you get my letter?" Since phones and all other electronic devices functioned strangely or not at all within the walls of Weeping Tree Books, we had decided to communicate the old-fashioned way. But apparently even that wasn't working. I struggled to make conversation while I wondered what had happened to my mail. It was just another riddle, I thought bitterly, one whose answer I figured I was better off not knowing. Amy wanted to stay over. I reflected on the wriggling thing that I had seen between the pages, the bloodstains on my sheets, and the strange box of powder on my bedside table. I told her that it wasn't a good night. Amy looked from me to her overnight bag and bit her lip disappointedly. Before I knew what I was doing, I slid over the counter and I threw my arms around her. A few hours later, we sat together in the employee's room inspecting Lars's box. Amy had decided that gloves weren't enough. She had also brought over goggles, a plastic apron, and a spoon to handle the stuff. She scattered a bit of it in a careful line in front of the door. We waited for something to happen, but nothing did. So this Lars guy gave you this stuff, but he didn't tell you how much of it to use, how long it lasts, and what it does. Amy asked incredulously. Pretty much, I nodded. Amy shook her head and warned me to be careful. She didn't have to tell me twice. I had hoped that the more time I spent as the bookkeeper of Weeping Tree Books, the more comfortable I would become with its peculiarities. But there was no way to predict what might rise out of its depths next. As Amy and I said our goodbyes the next morning, I tried to not think about what could be worming through the shelves behind me. Around noon, a delivery arrived. Like my mother Jennifer before me, I always offered tea and snacks to the drivers if they wanted to stop and share it. Until I met Amy, they were my only source of news from the outside world, and chatting with a regular person for a few minutes did wonders for my mental health. And just as importantly, it sometimes gave me important insights into the contents of all those anonymous boxes. Today's driver was Jacob, a young red-headed guy who had been friends with my mother. This is a weird one, Jacob told me, gesturing to the words scrawled in marker on the 3 boxes that he had carried in. Store in back and keep away from fire. There were singe marks on the corners of the cardboard. I leaned in for a closer look and tasted ash on the tip of my finger. My eyes watered as though the room had begun to fill with smoke. And was it just me, or did the air suddenly feel a little bit hotter too? I used a wooden ruler to lift one of the box flaps just a bit, but the volumes inside were burnt to a crisp. Why the hell would anybody want a burnt book? I wondered. You see what I mean? Jacob asked. I did, but I was focused on something else. A hairy black and yellow worm that had dropped down from the ceiling onto Jacob's shoulder. It was wriggling towards his neck. I leapt toward him with a shout and I smacked it away with the ruler. Hey, Jacob coughed, choking on the last of his tea. What's your problem? Look at that, I yelled, pointing at the creature that even now was squirming back toward the bookshelves. Jacob gave me an odd look. Dude, there's nothing there. The delivery driver took a few nervous steps backward, as though I were about to attack him. You know, Jacob muttered. Jenny used to say that everybody who worked here eventually died or went crazy. She asked me to let her know if I ever noticed her slipping, and I figured that I should do the same for you. I'm warning you now, Ben. It seems like you're losing it. I barely heard him. I dashed to the employee's room, slipped on my gloves, and tossed a handful of Lars's powder onto the squirming thing. It writhed and curled in on itself and emitted a horrid shriek. A few seconds later, it stopped moving and seemed to crumble into dust. You can't tell me you didn't hear that. I shouted triumphantly at Jacob, but he was already retreating out the door as though he couldn't wait to be gone. As if to prove to myself that I wasn't insane, I began pulling books from the nearest shelf and flipping through them like, well, a crazy person. At last, I found what I was looking for. A series of pages that had been tunneled through by a pair of fat yellow and black worms. I gave them the same powder treatment as the one that had fallen onto Jacob, then returned to the trolley that the delivery driver had left. Store in back, the label read. I scratched my head. In all my explorations and escape attempts, I had never once found an end to Weeping Tree Books. Where exactly was this delivery meant to go? And what would happen if it didn't arrive there on time? There were books in the store that released dangerous spirits after sunset, others that reacted to the phases of the moon or changed based on the person reading them, and those were just a few of the less dangerous oddities. No matter how much I wrinkled my nose, I just couldn't get the smell of charcoal out of it as I was near those books. Were they going to burst into flames if I didn't get them into place on time? Or did they contain the spirits of those who had died in some terrible fire, eager to spread their pain to the living? Either way, I didn't want to be around them for a second longer than I had to be. I knew from experience that Weeping Tree books reacted to the mental state of the person inside of it, so I did my best to imagine an image of what I was searching for. An aisle that dead-ended into a solid wall, instead of just more labyrinthine passages of bookshelves. It wasn't easy to focus though, not with all the squirming. I couldn't see them, but I had no doubt about what I was hearing. It was more of those black and yellow worms chewing their way through the books nearby. Or was it? Could it really all be in my head? Maybe Jacob had been right. Maybe after all the unnatural experiences that I had had at Weeping Tree Books, I was finally losing my mind. Either way, I was grateful that I had brought Lars's powder with me. It felt like a sort of talisman, and in a place like this, you wanted all the talismans that you could get. And maybe it was the claustrophobically low wooden ceiling and narrow aisles. Maybe it was the dim, cobwebby lights placed just far enough apart to create pools of shadow. Maybe it was the quiet that wasn't really quiet, just a stuffiness that muffled the scuffles, groans, and lonely footsteps that echoed through endless shelves. I glanced down at the red wire that ran along the floor, another talisman. One of the previous bookkeepers had installed it, and it showed the only true way back to the store entrance once the shelves began to change. If I wanted to continue straight forward, however, I was going to have to leave it behind. I knelt down, looped some wire of my own around it, and I kept walking. Time moves strangely in the depths of Weeping Tree Books. Minutes could seem to last for hours, or hours could pass by in minutes sometimes. I was afraid that I would return to the front desk and find that a decade had gone by during my absence. The unraveling of the wire at my side was the only way to be sure that time was passing at all. I slowly became aware of another sound, one with a slightly deeper pitch than the movements of the worms that I was sure I could still hear in the background. A sort of crunching. It was coming from somewhere up ahead, somewhere beyond where the lights seemed to simply end. I sighed and slipped on my headlamp. The roll of wire whirred. I was getting close to its end, and there was no guessing how far the dark aisle stretched on. I would reach the back wall before my lifeline ran out, I told myself, and I tried to believe it. That crunching noise was more intense up close. It reminded me of a Bible verse that I had heard somewhere, something about darkness and gnashing of teeth. But if that was the case, I wondered, then why did it sound as loud as a trash compactor? I was beginning to notice a smell too. A noxious blend of wood pulp, hot plastic, and spilled ink. I looked back over my shoulder. That last light seemed horribly far away. At last, I caught sight of a wall at the end of the aisle. It was just another ordinary floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, but it seemed to waver, as though I were seeing it through a heat mirage. It wasn't impossible, I figured. The air had been getting hotter and more humid with every step that I took. Wondering whether I was somehow above the bookstore's antiquated heating system, I pushed my trolley further forward. "Keep away from fire," the warning label said. Did that apply to heat as well? Soon the floor was soggy beneath my feet. Most of the titles nearby were invisible beneath a thick layer of black sludge that I assumed to be mold. I still had no idea what was causing the weird ripple effect on the wall before me. Just a few more steps, I told myself. After that, I could dump these boxes and never set foot in this nasty place again. The wheels of the trolley rolled a little faster. My feet inclined as though the floor had suddenly tilted forward. And then the wall up ahead opened wide. Wall was the wrong word for it. I could see that clearly now. Mouth would have been far more accurate. Its teeth were hardback and leather-bound. Its jaws the bent white metal of the shelves. It could have swallowed a semi-truck whole, to say nothing of me and my pathetic little cart of books, and my headlamp had stood no chance of penetrating its darkness. My heels began to slip. Lars's powder tumbled from the top of the trolley as it careened forward. I caught it, but not before half of its contents had spilled it uselessly onto the floor. The cart and its charred contents tumbled, clattering toward the wide-open maw below. I fell and felt my fingernails scrape uselessly on the mucky carpet. I flung myself onto the nearest shelf and clung to it as more books plummeted downward. The delivery I had been given crashed into those hardback teeth with a resounding clang, and then it disappeared. Inky saliva splattered high enough to reach my face. The crunching sound intensified and then it stopped. A burp that reeked of wet paper blew past me. The incline of the floor slowly returned to normal. I lowered myself gingerly onto my feet, listening. The wall at the end of the aisle now appeared to be an ordinary bookshelf, but I wasn't going to risk getting any closer to check. Had the bookstore eaten my delivery? Was this what was supposed to happen all along? With Lars's box of powder in one hand and my guideline wire in the other, I turned back toward the front desk. After so much time in the dark, the dim bulbs felt bright. The relief that I felt upon returning to the light didn't last. In my absence, I realized that squirming sound had grown louder. It seemed to be coming from all directions. The books on the shelves beside me, the flimsy ceiling above, even from under the floor. I walked a little faster. I was beginning to suspect that the nasty gray-green carpet wasn't only wrinkled, but it was moving. Something or millions of somethings tried to push up from beneath. I scattered some of Lars's powder and watched the roiling subside. I shook the half-empty box, wondering how far I could get with what was left. It was happening just like before with Jacob. They were falling from above. I brushed away the 3 or 4 worms that had landed on my neck and shoulders before they could dig into my flesh, but with the one on my arm, I wasn't fast enough. The pain cut through my skin like tiny needles of fiberglass, and trying to pluck the tiny worm off was just as bad. Its black and yellow hairs were needle sharp. I felt warm blood run down my fingers as I squeezed, trying to pull the thing loose before it burrowed any deeper into me. It finally came free with a sickening pop. I shook it off my hand with a yell, and then I looked down. There was no counting how many of them were wriggling up my pant legs and across the tops of my shoes. Suddenly careless of how much of Lars's powder I had left or how potent it was, I dusted myself with the stuff from the waist down. I tossed clouds of it through the air as I ran. My eyes stung and the tips of my fingers burned numbly, but I didn't care. The shelves on either side were so covered in worms that the books themselves seemed to be moving. I tore off my jacket and held it over my head as more worms fell down like rain. At last, I could see daylight up ahead. But would it matter? The bell above the door rang. My gut seemed to drop. It was Amy walking toward me with a smile, a wave, and a bag of food for us to share. Just like Jacob before her, she couldn't see the black and yellow tide swarming around her. A single worm had burrowed almost an inch into my forearm in only a few seconds. If several of them attacked her at once. "Amy, get to my office, now!" I screamed. I was aware that I sounded like a ridiculous manager in a bad comedy, but I had to get her moving. There were fewer books on the counter near the employees' room, which meant the worms might not have gone there in search of food, yet. Amy was confused, but by now she understood enough about the bookstore's strangeness to know that I was not messing around. She dropped the bag and dashed for the cheap wooden door that read, "Staff." I was right behind her. We closed the door and stuffed whatever into the gaps above and beneath. While we worked, I gave Amy a quick, breathless rundown of the situation. Weeping Tree Books was going to be completely overrun, but I didn't care about any of that. All that mattered was our survival. "Only scatter it around what you want to keep," Lars had said, but only now did I understand what he had meant. The powder wasn't for protecting the books, it was for protecting us. And yet now, after my frantic sprint to safety, the little box was almost empty. Worms wiggled through the slats in the vent and the gaps between the hinges that had been too small for us to plug. It was over. They were here. Amy pulled a blanket off the bed and held it over her head like a mosquito net. I saw immediately what she was planning. I scattered a thin layer of the powder on top of it, hoping that it wouldn't eat through the cloth. The rest I spread across the floor beneath our feet. For a long while, the only sound was the sizzling of the powder, and for me at least, the endless gnawing of the tiny creatures that were devouring the bookshop. Amy's face grew pale. She might not have been able to see the worms, but she could see the shadow that they cast as they blotted out the light above. Lars's powder had killed the first wave, but even as they died, more wriggled on top of them. We swapped positions when our arms got tired and put all of our strength into the hope that our makeshift fortress would hold. And somehow hold it did. Whatever was in that powder, it was some strong stuff. And no matter how many of the things piled on top of another in depth, it kept its potency. I wondered what anybody standing outside of Weeping Tree Books would see if they looked inside. An ordinary bookshop, drowned in shadow, its windows completely blacked out. Would they consider stepping inside? I hope not. The dusty bell above the door never rang. Night fell and slowly the maddening squirming sound began to fade. I thought about all the insect species that lay dormant for years, only to breed and die in the span of a few days or hours, even after the noise had stopped completely. It was a long while before Amy and I dared to peer outside of our refuge. The only sign of those squirming yellow and black horrors was the devastation that they had left behind. Everything from the carpet to the cheap plywood furniture was chewed to pieces. Tunnels had been bored through the door, the walls, even my cheap bedside lamp. I didn't even want to imagine the bookstore outside. A new fear, one that had nothing to do with a plague of worms, swept over me. Oh, how would some of Weeping Tree's more difficult clients react to the news that their orders had been destroyed? I was still wondering how to break the news when I realized how warm it had suddenly gotten. Amy looked at me, her eyes wide, sweat was streaming down her face as well. We tugged at her clothes, trying to put some air between our skin and the soaked-through fabric, but it was useless. The air itself felt too hot and humid to breathe. In a matter of minutes, the tiny room where I had spent my life as bookkeeper had become a sweltering sauna. The smoky smell emanating from the vent reminded me of something. The books that these stores seemed to have consumed earlier. Was the Weeping Tree Books purging itself? Was it somehow aware of the infestation that had taken hold within it? And if so, what did that mean for us? The floor lurched beneath my feet. Amy screamed. I crashed into the pit-ridden mirror where my mother had hung my baby picture, back when she was the bookkeeper. A deep rumble shook the room. I was used to the sounds of the store rearranging itself, but this was different. It was like Weeping Tree Books was capsizing, sinking into the depths of some black sea beyond space and time. And somewhere those dark fires continued to burn. Lamps and light fixtures shattered as Amy and I tumbled onto the upside ceiling. With another groan of crunching metal, we rolled back down the opposite wall. The weakened frame of the bed crumpled when it hit the ground. Amy and I climbed to our feet, coughing from the dust, the heat, and the remains of Lars's powder. Slowly, the unbearable warmth began to subside. The store beyond the door was pitch dark. My headlamp had disappeared in all the chaos, but I nudged the door open anyway. I needed to know what was going on out there. Against my better judgment, I reached up and used the circuit breaker to switch on the overhead lights. Weeping Tree Books looked exactly as it had that morning, prior to the invasion. There wasn't a single page out of place, although I did notice that the selection of books nearby was completely different than I remembered. It was as though the storage shed a damaged husk and regenerated itself. Was this why, despite the efforts of some of the previous bookkeepers, it could never truly be destroyed? Amy appeared in the doorway behind me, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I wondered what time it was and then realized that it probably didn't matter. It also occurred to me that I should probably turn the lights back off. I didn't want anything lurking in the pitch-black darkness to think that we were open for business. I unlaced my dust-covered fingers with Amy's own and turned back toward the ruins of the employee's room. "I hope you've got somebody that you can bill for all this," Amy murmured, taking in the chaos around her. I thought of Osgood Mosby, the bookstore's smug little lawyer, and smiled. I had a few ideas about how to redecorate the place. My mornings in Weeping Tree Books always begin the same way. I roll out of my queen-sized feather bed in the employee's room, start the coffee maker, and fry some bacon and eggs on the electric griddle. I sit down in the wing-backed armchair in the corner, open up a book, and have breakfast while I wait for the screams to subside. And they usually do around sunrise. I used to eat my meals at the front desk, but after a while I realized that watching the world go by through the display window only caused me pain. I would never be able to stand in that plaza beneath the willow tree. I would never be able to look up at the sky and feel the warm sun on my face. I would never be able to leave Weeping Tree Books. After the fire, the law firm that manages the bookstore's finances refurnished the employee's room. It was a lot more comfortable after the remodel, but there was no escaping the truth. Weeping Tree Books was my prison, and one day it would be my tomb. In the bright May sunshine outside, I could see a business owner on his way to the accounting firm next door, a single mom chatting with a nail stylist from the salon, and a line of construction workers getting some badly needed food at the Chinese restaurant across the plaza. These people had their problems, no doubt, but they were rational ones, not like the problems of Elizabeth, who had been screaming outside my door. Last Tuesday, a girl came into Weeping Tree Books and stopped uncertainly in front of my desk. Her auburn hair was a mess. There were dark circles under her eyes, and the cuffs of her oversized jacket had begun to fray. I had a feeling that she had been pulling at their strings obsessively. Elizabeth was the name stitched into the work uniform that she wore underneath. Even before she opened her mouth, I was worried about her. Worried about what might have brought her to my shop. She asked where the self-help section was. I told her that we didn't have one, which was a lie, and that she was unlikely to find any books on the subject here, which was even more untrue. I had hoped that my answer would make her turn around and leave, but instead she just bit her lip and headed into the stacks. I had physically tried to stop customers before. The bookstore didn't like that, not at all, so I had no choice but to let Elizabeth go. I wondered if she noticed how the aisle that she was walking down was much longer than it should have been. From where she was standing, the display window would have appeared postage stamp small if she had turned around to look, but she never did. And whatever she had come here for, she was intent on finding it, and Weeping Tree Books would make sure that she did. rather than a random walk-in from the street or some dangerous denizen of the supernatural. Elizabeth was likely the sort of customer who had heard rumors about the store, or read some anonymous post online about the knowledge that it contained. Weeping Tree Books held secrets with the power to change a life, or destroy it. I grabbed a cart and I headed after her. I told myself that I wasn't snooping. I was just getting some new items for the display window, and I was almost able to believe it. Elizabeth turned down a passage to my left. Keeping her in the corner of my eye, I began to stack the trolley with summer thriller novels. I tried to avoid the true crime section. A lot of it hadn't happened yet. Elizabeth stood wide-eyed in front of a wall of self-help volumes that hadn't been there the night before. She took down a guide called Dark Reflections, Coming Face to Face with Your Own Worst Self. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had never heard of the book before, but something told me that this was going to be a bad one. A warning rose in my throat, but before I could think of a way to distract her, Elizabeth had opened up to the table of contents. She bit her lip again as she read, completely focused on a way to get free from the part of herself that hurt. Was it an addiction, a mental disorder, or just the same character traits that she had always lived with, the ones that kept sabotaging her success over and over again? I wasn't sure, but whatever it was slowly taking shape in front of her. She was too focused on her reading to see how the shadows of the narrow, dimly lit aisle had coalesced into a copy of herself. By the time she looked up, another Elizabeth was staring at her from across the page. The new Elizabeth's hair hung down low over its face. It wiggled its fingers and toes, which, like the rest of it, were bare. It was as though it had never had a body before, and it needed to test its own strength. Elizabeth dropped the book and sprang back with a shout. It double gripped her by the hair and smashed her head against the nearest shelf. She fought back, punching her attacker and kneeing it in the chest. But just as it had been when it was a part of her, the darkness was stronger. It wrestled her to the ground and prepared to crush her eyes with its thumbs. The real Elizabeth squirmed backwards and slipped free. She ran to the wall of books at the end of the hallway and tried to feign right. Her dark half caught her in a headlock until she bit its arm and kicked it away. They rounded a corner and I ran after them. When Elizabeth's dark half pinned her for a second time, I gave my book cart a shove and sent it rolling into her. I had hoped that the impact would give the real Elizabeth a chance to get away. But when the cart had staggered her doppelganger, she didn't flee. Instead, she doubled down on her attack, bashing her elbow into its face again and again. The smoke gray liquid that pooled from its wounds was nothing like blood, and with a feral shout, it bounded on all fours towards the depths of the bookstore. Elizabeth shot me an angry glare, and at last I understood that she didn't want to escape. She meant for this to end here one way or another. Without another word, she chased after her double. I, meanwhile, returned to my cart. I picked up the copy of Dark Reflections from where it had fallen on the floor. If I squinted, I could almost see a razor-thin smile forming in the air in front of me. I shuddered and re-shelved it as quickly as possible. I didn't see who won the fight, but I do know that neither of them survived. The grisly duel plays out again each night. The same high-pitched shrieks and wild blows, rampaging through the store until dawn. I try to stay out of their way. I don't like to think what might happen if both sides of Elizabeth looked up from their struggle to find a living, flesh-and-blood target for all that hate. Eliza and Beth locked forever in a death or death struggle. I wrote that line in a letter to my girlfriend Amy, thinking that it would sound clever or funny. But when I thought about their angry screams echoing forever down all these empty aisles, I couldn't bring myself to laugh. After the shrieks finally stopped, I wash my dishes, dress, and leave the employee's room to open the store. As always, I hesitate in the doorway for a long moment before stepping out into the bookshop. The sunlight streaming through the display window banishes most of the horrors that inhabit Weeping Tree Books, but it never quite gets all of them. That morning, everything seemed quiet. There were no swarms of hideous centipedes creeping along the shelves, no ink-blooded horrors leering around the corner of the aisles. I got to work on the first task of the day, which was always the same: preparing special orders for pickup. The clients of Weeping Tree Books didn't have much tolerance for delays or mistakes, so the correct volume always had to be prepared as soon as possible. I was on my way to fetch a 16th century copy of the Mirabilis Liber when I first noticed the door. Where a bookshelf should have been, there was now a wall with an open door. It looked exactly like the ugly wood-paneled door of the employee's room, but there were no lights on inside. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I froze, like a child waiting for a monster to emerge from their closet, but the store was dead silent. The longer I stood still, the more that I noticed other, more subtle differences in the store around me. The shelves, rearranging themselves, was nothing new, but now the carpet was a dull deep sea blue instead of a greenish gray. The lights too had changed, becoming glass globes that were more stylish than the bare incandescent bulbs that I was used to. Almost reluctantly, I looked toward the display window. The plaza was gone, and I had never seen the street outside in my life. The people in oddly cut clothes hurried by, and were those zeppelins that I saw in the sky. The only feature I recognized was the willow planted as if by accident among the other shaded trees that lined the boulevard outside. The door behind me creaked, as though moved by an unseen breeze. Someone was coming, I was sure of it. I scrambled behind the end cap of the nearest aisle and I pressed my back against it listening. A girl ran past. I got only a fleeting glimpse of her, but she seemed to be dressed in the same odd outfit as the people outside, and her amber eyes were wide with fear. She was clutching her hand to her chest like it hurt her. She didn't even look my way as she bolted into the lightless room. I waited a few minutes to make sure that the coast was clear and then returned to what I had been doing. Thankfully, the blue guideline cable was still there and I could follow it to the prophecies section and retrieve my client's order. As I walked, the store slowly returned to the layout that I was used to. The bare yellowish bulbs and the ugly gray-green carpet were back, as well as the plaza outside the display window. With the book in hand, I walked back to the front desk, asking myself if I had done the right thing. I told myself that I had. In places like Weeping Tree Books, speaking first or intervening could be dangerous, even deadly. I felt bad for the girl, whoever she was, but I had my own survival to think about, right? By the time that I prepared the morning's orders, the woman in the black turtleneck had already arrived. She came in every day at 10 a.m. on the dot. She never spoke or bought anything, but she didn't cause trouble either. Mostly, she just drew in the large sketchbook that she carried and observed the other patrons. It was odd behavior to be sure, but probably harmless. Or so I thought at the time. Sometimes I had a chance to peek over the woman in black's shoulder at her drawing pad. I discovered that so far she had drawn the display window, a reading nook, and even my work area behind the desk. I was surprised and maybe a little insulted that she had never asked to draw me as well. And maybe I thought uneasily she had, just without my permission. And maybe she had illustrated me being stalked by hungry monstrosities with limbs too long for their bodies. Maybe she had drawn me being pulled apart by a mob or psychotic, grinning customers. Maybe some of the evil that I had encountered in the bookshop was her fault. I forced myself to stop. With so much time to think, it was easy to descend into obsession and paranoia. My long, lonely months at the bookstore had convinced me that it wasn't safe for anyone to be alone with their own thoughts, especially not in a place like Weeping Tree Books. For all I knew, the woman in the turtleneck sweater was just a hobby artist who liked to draw cozy interior scenes. Even so, her presence in the store always made me feel uneasy, observed somehow. The way she wandered into the depths of the store only to reappear hours later reminded me too much of Jacob, the graduate researcher who had planned to sell the store's deadly knowledge to the highest bidder. He had been looking for books on the creation of plagues. God only knew what the woman in the black turtleneck was after. Without realizing it, I found myself trying to follow her while I shelved new books or took inventory. And that was where the trouble started. After nearly a year as the bookkeeper, I thought I knew most of the entities that appeared in these shallow levels of the bookstore. Entities like the Burning Man, a former bookkeeper who had tried to set fire to the store to escape it. Now his spirit was cursed to wander these halls, shrouded in flame. Or there were the mimics, being with no appearance of their own that stole the faces of others. Their inability to blink usually gave them away before they got too close. Usually. Like a well-traveled trucker who knows which route has the worst traffic and which is the quickest in bad weather, I had become accustomed to them. I thought I could afford the distraction of keeping an eye on the woman in the black turtleneck. I was wrong. The woman's high-heeled boots echoed eerily in the stuffy, low-ceilinged store. When she turned a corner and stopped, I thought it would be the perfect moment to sneak a look at what she was drawing. And when I peered around the shelves, however, she was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the door was back, opening impossibly into the surface of a standalone bookshelf. The carpet, I noticed, was a mottled mix of blue and green. Half of the lights were incandescent, half were the odd globes that I had seen earlier, and one was even a twisted mix of the two. I could hear the sound of weeping from inside the door. I backed slowly around a corner, and when I looked again, the strange room had vanished. Meanwhile, the echo of the woman in black's footsteps had returned. I spotted her in an intersection several aisles down. How had she gotten so far away so quickly? She paused, as though curious about what I would do next. I felt the frustration rise in me. The whole situation was absurd. Why shouldn't I just talk to her? This wasn't some fairy tale hag who would steal my name if I gave it to her, or some sadistic killer who cut out the tongues of anybody who spoke to them. And this was just some lady with a sketchbook. "Hey," I waved and smiled. The woman in the black turtleneck glared at me for a full 10 seconds and then kept walking. I don't know why I went after her. Maybe it was just stupid pride. I had spent so much time pondering her presence in the store. I felt like she owed me an explanation. Even more disturbingly, I realized that I had come to think of Weeping Tree Books as my own home turf. And who was she to turn her back on me in my territory? It was like something out of a kid's cartoon. Every time I thought I was getting close, she would appear at the crossing on some other aisle, tantalizingly far away. The longer the chase went on, the harder it was to abandon, even though I knew in the back of my mind that the woman in the black turtleneck was leading me deeper into the bookstore. I made sure to keep the blue guideline cable on the floor in sight, but that was the only exception that I made for my own safety. When the door to that dark room had reappeared, I barely gave it a second glance. I needed to catch the woman in the black turtleneck now. What if she never came back after this? What if I never found out what she had been doing here? I was too caught up in my own spiraling thoughts to realize that I had been led into a dead end. I stared, disbelieving at the 3 solid walls of books around me. There was no path for the woman in black to have taken, and yet she was undeniably gone. I jabbed my fingernails into the cracks between the shelves. They were immovable and airtight. Sighing, I turned back to the central corridor, but it too had disappeared. In its place was a wall with a familiar wide-open door, a door that led to a lightless room and seemed to swing softly in an invisible breeze. I shifted my weight and felt the floor sag beneath my feet, a reminder that this was really happening. I didn't want to take a single step toward that eerily familiar and lightless room, and at the same time I was suddenly sure that someone was inside of it, approaching swiftly but silently, like a child closing his eyes when a monster comes out of the closet. I believed that as long as I didn't look, as long as I stood still and pretended that everything was normal, then I would be safe. Sweat trickled down my spine as I pretended to reorganize the cheesy 1950s sci-fi novels in front of me. Oh, the tension was unbearable. As though pulled by an invisible string, I glanced back toward the open door, and I saw a pair of bloodshot amber eyes staring into mine. A mummy. That was my first thought. Something out of an old horror movie, embalmed with yellow wrappings. But it wasn't wrapped in linen or gauze. It was covered in pages, thousands of them stuck so tightly to its body that they at first appeared to be its skin. No, not its skin. Her skin. Because what was beneath all of those words and illustration had once undeniably been human. I braced myself for an attack, but instead, the mummified stranger stumbled to her knees and gripped my hand. "Help," she whispered. A page unraveled from her finger and wrapped around mine. Its underside was sticky, rubbery, and oddly warm to the touch. By the time I tried to pull it off, it had already started multiplying, unfolding another sheaf around my palm. I felt a twinge of pain as words and illustrations bloomed across the paper. Being written, I realized, in my own blood. The mummified girl's eyes widened, horrified by what she had done. Beneath the wrappings, her face was a mask of guilt and fear as she backed away into the darkness. Meanwhile, the unraveling pages had reached my wrist. I pulled out my lighter, hoping that its flame would block their path. Yet when I singed the yellow paper, it hurt as badly as burning my own skin. I looked around desperately for a solution, barely noticing that both the open door and the mummified stranger had vanished once again. "Hold still," someone said. The woman in the black turtleneck poised a very fancy pen above my arm. Before I could ask what she intended to do, she started drawing. Fat, black droplets like raindrops encircling my bicep. The expanding pages dropped to the floor when the ink had touched them, blackened like withered leaves. In a matter of seconds, the paper that had been fusing with my flashlight crumbled, stained and harmless on the bookstore floor. "Oh, it's a shame," the woman added. "If those pages had kept expanding, you would have been able to read the story of your life on them. At least until they finished draining you." "Who was that?" I mumbled, rubbing my arm. "What? You think our reality is the only one with a bookstore like this one? The only one with a bookkeeper like you?" The woman in the black turtleneck scoffed. "The border between worlds is thin here, as you all know, and sometimes they overlap." Had that girl been a bookkeeper too? One of the unlucky ones who had succumbed to the store before she realized what she had gotten herself into? If things had gone differently, my fate could have been the same as hers. I was so lost in thought that it took me a moment to realize the woman in the black turtleneck was holding out her hand to me. "Sorry about the game of hide and seek. I only wanted to get you back into the right reality before it was too late. My name is Eliza, by the way, and you, young man, must be the bookkeeper." "You know about this place? What it really is, I mean?" I asked, stunned. "You don't think all of your customers are monsters, do you?" Eliza smirked. Oh, there's knowledge here, and like any knowledge, it can be used for good or for evil. Personally, I just like what it does to my illustrations. Eliza held up her sketchbook. The most recent drawing was an odd perspective, looking down from the ceiling. It showed two people standing in a narrow aisle between the bookshelves. It was Eliza and I. She looked up suddenly, and the figure in her drawing did the same. The unsettling sensation that she was watching me from within the page made me recoil a bit. Eliza chuckled. You've seen one of my pieces before. I made an album once full of illustrations of prison cells. Does that sound familiar? I knew the book she was referring to. A kidnapper in a pig mask had used it to capture children. And that's your idea of a work of art. I glared at her. Like I said, power can be used to help or to harm, and I would like to help you if I can. Eliza hesitated. Let me ask you something. Do you like being the bookkeeper? Would you leave if you could? Well, of course I would, but it doesn't matter. I won't be going out that door until after I'm dead. Exactly, Eliza nodded. The bookstore uses your body to care for itself while you're alive, but it places no claim on your soul unless you give it a reason to, like poor Elizabeth or Eugene, the Burning Man. If your soul were to leave your physical body, then return to it. She trailed off. I asked Eliza if she meant that I should fake my own death. Oh, there will be nothing fake about it, she warned me grimly. You will be dead. Dead as a doornail, dead as a post. Dead as whatever simile or metaphor you want to use. You will have to navigate the other side on your own. But as long as you stay away from the light and remember who you are, then you should be fine. Once the store releases your corpse, I will bind your soul back to it. And then, Ben Hearn, you'll finally be free. I couldn't recall ever having told her my name, but that hardly seemed to matter now. All of this was crazy talk, the sort of thing that a cult leader might tell his followers right before he laced their drinks with cyanide. I shook my head. I know I'm asking for a lot of trust, the woman in the black turtleneck admitted, and that's why I'm going to prove to you that it works. What? How? I had barely finished the question when Eliza lunged forward and stabbed her pen into my jugular. The pain and terror of having a sharp foreign object embedded in my neck was overwhelming. Quantities of blood that I had never imagined my veins could contain ran down my chest as Eliza lowered me gently to the floor. Oh, sorry about the mess, she whispered, and my vision went as dark as ink. And during the long, dull hours that I had spent as bookkeeper, one of the things that I had often read about was near-death experiences. Was there a reason why they seemed so similar across time and across cultures? Did the human mind simply generate a set series of sensations during its final moments? Or could it be that the events that people described happening to them after death had really occurred? Sitting behind the front desk, I had pored through book after book on the subject. Now I was about to find out for myself. The weightlessness and feeling of falling, well, that was real, as was the flurry of images that fluttered up around me like a mass of birds taking flight. Friends, a family, pivotal moments in my life, side by side with the others I had ignored at the time, but that now came back in vivid detail. The darkness swallowed it all. It was indescribably huge, and bigger than the night sky the first time my father took me camping in the desert, bigger than anything. I had never imagined that emptiness could be so terrifying. And then there it was, a soft and distant white light. As strange as it sounds, it seemed to be calling out to me, telling me that everything was going to be all right. I could move toward it if I chose. I could be held, welcomed, comforted. All I had to do was want it. I noticed uneasily that the light itself wasn't stationary either. It was drifting slowly nearer. But hadn't Eliza told me not to go toward the light? I must have misheard her, because the closer it came, the more at ease I felt, as though my soul was being wrapped up in warm blankets. A song like a lullaby in 1,000 different languages soothed the panic that I had felt when I began plunging through all that emptiness. And then I noticed something on the edges of that gentle white glow. They weren't exactly cobwebs or the crooked limbs of some enormous spider, but they reminded me a little of both. If I squinted, I thought that I could see the tortured expressions of the figures that were bound to them. Although whether they were writhing to break free or urging me onward, I couldn't have said. I tried to slow my drifting, only to find that I couldn't. It was like a tiny boat trapped by an immense tide. There was nothing to hold on to, no way to stop my progress. I didn't even have arms or legs to flail as I was pulled toward the light. I thought about the message it had given me, about how I had to choose to move toward it. And what would happen if I chose the emptiness instead? Slowly, I felt my speed slowing until I was moving downward and backward instead of forward. The light grew distant but never completely faded or ceased to beckon me toward it. Eliza's advice and pure chance were the only reasons that I had seen the twisted forms lurking the light. The only reason that I had enjoyed them. How many others had succumbed to the temptation? How many others had gone trustingly toward that hopeful glow? I racked my brain trying to remember what else Eliza had said. Something about remembering who I was. Well, that didn't seem so difficult. At least, not until I tried to do it. The memories that had swirled around me when my fall began had disappeared like water going down a drain. I realized with horror that I couldn't even remember what my father's face looked like. The light far away now seemed to be mocking me. Was this what it was going to be like from now on? An endless plunge through a sightless and soundless eternity, until I lost myself completely. Until I became part of all of this nothing. What had I been doing right before this? Who had I been? That's right, I had been the bookkeeper. I had been trapped in a store and a woman in black had offered me a way out. And then, I winced at the memory of the sharp pen plunging into my neck. And before that, there had been a girl too. A girl named Amy. Her family had run the Chinese restaurant across the plaza. She had saved my life and I had saved hers. She had told me that she would wait for me until I could escape from the bookstore. Hold on, I told myself. Hold on. The harder I focused, the more the darkness around me began to fade. I was no longer falling, but hovering. If I looked down, I could see Eliza dragging my corpse out through the door of Weeping Tree Books and into the center of the plaza. She heaved me onto one of the stone benches surrounding the big willow, and then began drawing a series of strange chalk symbols around it. If I looked up, I could still see the emptiness that I had fallen through and the welcoming light in the distance. It whispered that it wasn't too late. I could still join the chorus of voices within. Now, hold on, hold on. I forced myself to focus on simple things. The gray rock of the benches, the scratch and pastel colors of Eliza's chalk, the wind through the willow tree, its gnarled roots. From my new out-of-body perspective, the stuff that those roots sank into no longer looked like ordinary dirt at all. Whatever it was, it looked as black and liquid as molten tar. The stuff rippled. There was movement within. A hand emerged from its inky surface. Something was pulling itself free and moving toward my lifeless body. It was vaguely man-shaped. It was so dark that it seemed to consume the light around it. Eliza stopped scrawling symbols and looked up. as though she had sensed that something wasn't quite right. But I was clearly the only one who could see the figure rising from beneath the tree. I willed myself down toward the ground, maneuvering between my own body and the living shadow. It clambered up to its full height. Its arms and fingers seemed a little too stretched, its legs bent in the wrong direction. A tendril wisp of something like smoke connected its head to the black liquid at the base of the tree. It narrowed its all too human, honey brown eyes at me, and then it grabbed me. I had thought that being incorporeal would for some reason make it impossible to feel pain. I was wrong about that. When the thing squeezed, it didn't bruise skin or break bones. Instead, it seemed to be smothering my very self. Everything that made me, well, me, flickered like a flame cut from fresh air. It was going to take whatever energy I had left, and then it was going to take possession of my flesh. My body would awaken when Eliza completed her ritual, but I wouldn't be the one inside of it. I couldn't let it end like this. I had suffered too much and sacrificed too much to let it end like this. The thought made me burn bright with anger, and the dark figure clinging onto me loosened its grip, and then it clenched down again with renewed force. I fed that anger and that righteousness, all of the energy that I had. My attacker dropped me, threw its emaciated hands up to the front of its face, and retreated toward the pool of shadow. My glow continued to intensify, out of control until it had swallowed Eliza, the bookshop square, and even the sky in an endless sea of brightness. It was the last thing that I knew before I opened my real physical eyes. Eliza gazed down at me with an "I told you so" smirk spread across her face. I sat up unsteadily, running my fingers over the odd chalk squiggles that were already fading from the stone bench that I lay on. A cool breeze blew across my face. For the first time in nearly a year, I was looking at the display window of Weeping Tree Books from the outside. "What happens now?" I asked Eliza. "The store just stays empty until some poor schmuck wanders in and gets trapped till the day that he dies." "No," Eliza stood. "I will be the next bookkeeper. Why do you think that I helped you? Out of the goodness of my heart." She laughed mirthlessly. A low gray cloud drifted in front of the sun, and suddenly the late spring day felt a little colder. "Oh, I've been around a long time, and this world holds no more secrets for me, and nothing out here can compare to the wonder within those walls." I remembered of a quote from a 300-year-old book that I had flipped through once in the store, one called Paradise Lost. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. I asked her if she was sure about this. "I brought you back from the dead," she reminded me. "I would like to think I know what I'm doing, wouldn't you?" She had a point. Wind ruffled her silky brown hair. What was I supposed to do now? Thank her? Offer her a hug or a handshake? Eliza seemed above all of those things somehow ancient and terrible in a way that I hadn't noticed earlier. Before I could decide how to react, she had snatched up her sketchbook and her small black handbag and began walking toward Weeping Tree Books. She stepped through the door without a single look back. I never saw her again. A light rain began to fall. I turned my face toward it and I shut my eyes. I was free. My first call, of course, was to Amy, and my second was to Osgood Mosby, the bookstore's lawyer. He struggled to keep his cool after hearing my voice on the phone. Nothing like this had ever happened before, he admitted, and he supposed that some amount of compensation was in order. It wasn't much, considering what I had been through, but it was a start. Piece by piece, I began to put together a life. I tried to not think about shadowy figures waiting to slip beneath my skin, or the horror of the light that so many people saw in their final moments. I didn't ever want to return to the plaza of Weeping Tree Books, but considering that Amy's parents' restaurant was located there, I didn't have much choice. When I finally did find the strength to go back, however, I was shocked by what I found. There was a for sale sign in the bookstore's display window, and when I peered inside, I saw only an empty, ordinary storefront. Stranger still, the gnarled willow at the center of the plaza had simply vanished. I asked John Way and the beauticians at the nail salon what had happened to it, but none of them could recall there having ever been a tree in the plaza at all. Was Weeping Tree Books gone for good? Maybe Eliza had found a way to seal it off from the sane, rational world, or maybe it had been sucked back into whatever anomalous space it had come from. I wanted to believe it, but I knew better. I know that somewhere out there on some small town's main street, or in some suburbs, a dying strip mall, there's a bookshop with a willow tree out front. Maybe there's a woman with a black turtleneck sitting inside, taking notes on some old manuscript or sketching her customers while they browse the shelves. I hope so, because if not, if the chair behind that front desk is empty, the next bookkeeper will be whoever walks through the front door. It could be anybody, and maybe even you. Hey everyone, this is part 4 of Where the Bad Cops Go. If you missed the previous parts, I'll have them linked below in the description. New episodes of this series will be posted every Sunday until it's finished. Enjoy. Nick and I had to isolate ourselves. Not only because we had to stay up for 72 hours straight, but because we were scared we might spread what we had to others. Neither of us knew what this sore thing might do to us, but if 72 hours of being awake was what was necessary to keep us and the others from getting sick, we were gonna do it. Luckily, the weekend was just around the corner. A couple of us had Memorial Day off. Nick managed to get a hold of Reggie, who could cover his shift in return for Nick taking a shift on Independence Day. Fair deal. So, with a 3-day weekend, we had our work cut out for us. Caffeine was a given, but Nick also had to get some heavier stuff. The kind of thing that gets your heart racing to levels that it shouldn't. I'm not going to go into detail, but we needed a serious push to get past those last few hours. Remember, both of us had already been up for a full day when we first got exposed to this thing. So we were looking at almost 4 whole days and no preparation. We made the best of it. We played games, we ate takeout, we set new records on Nick's old Guitar Hero games that he dug out of storage. The plastic guitars were a bit stiff and sun-yellowed, but they worked just fine most of the time. The green button would get a bit stuck though. We went for walks, and we took turns taking cold showers. We had a spontaneous karaoke thing going on in the living room. Anything we could do to keep the ball rolling and our eyes open. Sometimes I would almost fall asleep standing up. Just leaning against a wall was bad enough. My knees would lock into place and my body would slump a little. And that's when Nick would shake me back to life. I had to get him a couple of times too. He once laid down face first on the couch and I immediately flipped it over, almost wrecking his coffee table as he came tumbling down. It was stupid, but we had to be stupid to make it through this. We had been up for over 40 hours and neither of us were making sense. We were out for a walk, hearing the frogs croak in the distance. The sun had just set, but we could still see the light peeking over the horizon. We tried to keep a good pace, but we could both feel it. We were slowing down. I had to keep us focused on something, so I brought up the first thing that came to mind. Your wife left you for a Salt Lake City stripper. Yup, Nick nodded. Had the biceps and the stomach thing and all of it. And they still together. What? No, he laughed. They were never together, but she tried, you know. I'm not following. She went for the guy. She called me up, said it was over, and went for the guy in this big romantic hullabaloo. And he blew her off. Well, he was gay, Nick shrugged, so it wasn't really like that. Nick looked up as if counting the stars. He sighed. The bags under his eyes looked darker than usual. I guess when you've seen the greener grass, everything else starts to look gross, right? Oh, you ain't gross, Nick. You're just another kind of grass, a sort of bluegrass, you know. Bluegrass, he chuckled. I like that. Bluegrass kind of guy. Those last few hours, we ended up watching reruns of Family Matters and chugging Four Loko. I had the Swedish fish flavor. Nick knew a guy with boxes of the stuff. It was vile, but we had to get over those last few hours. Nick was pacing back and forth, but was tired enough to almost fall over. Done, Nick slurred. I'm done. It's just over 2 hours. You can do 2 hours, I assured him. You can do it. I'm gonna go stick my head in the freezer. He did just as he said and stuck his head in the freezer. I was trying to keep up with the Winslows and their goofy adventures, but it was hard to pay attention. I had to fill in the blanks a lot and it didn't make a lot of sense. I barely registered the strange colors on screen as Steve Urkel. You know what we can do, Nick said. We can prep. What do you mean? We can make it comfortable. I'm gonna make my bed with all new stuff and you can crash out here. We can get like tea and ice water for when we wake up. And I get like scented candles and we put on whale song and we sleep like goddamn royalty, I added. Right? Yeah, he nodded, getting more enthusiastic. Yeah, you're right. So we got to work. Nick prepped his bed and I went to his car to get a couple of extra blankets for the couch. Problem was, those were really soft blankets and there was something about the backseat of his car that calmed me. Maybe the smell and feel of the synthetic leather. And so I crawled in the back seat. There was a cold wind blowing and so I closed the door. And in that silence I figured, oh, what's 1 hour? It would just be an hour. Would that really be so bad? And so I crashed in the back seat of his car. I was out for 14 hours. Nick got about 12. I woke up with a massive headache, but the ice water that Nick had prepped helped a little. I had made us a couple of sandwiches, and I thanked the past us for thinking ahead, as the two of us prepped for work. By all metrics, we ought to have been fine. 72 hours had passed. Nick drove me to work. My car was still back at my place. The conversation dulled as I chugged a full bottle of ice water, pouring the last few drops on my face. Nick looked like he had been trampled by some kind of depressed parade. Even his hair looked tired. We're not doing that again, I said. No, we're not, Nick agreed. So we're dropping this. I didn't answer. I had pulled Nick into some bad shit one time too many. And yeah, the ends justify the means. I was looking for this lost girl and I had stumbled upon the very thing that got her lost in the first place. Nick looked over at me and sighed. He took a moment to choose his words. I get it, he finally said. You wanted to help, you still do, but let's think about it. Let's be careful. If you want me to back off, you gotta promise me something, Nick. He rolled his eyes and then looked at me. I wasn't joking and he could tell. With a sigh, he nodded. You gotta promise me that if you pick up any lead whatsoever on Adam's missing girl, you're telling me. You can call the shots, but there's gotta be shots to call. I'm not the only one here to serve and protect, right? Nick tasted the words, throwing a glance in the rearview mirror. All right, he said. Deal. It took us a full work week to get back on our feet. My sleep schedule was a joke. One night I'd be in bed by 6, and another night I couldn't sleep at all. I would zone out at work, missing a word every now and then, much like I had missed the story beats on Family Matters. I would lag behind a bit trying to piece together the context and make it make sense. As I slowly got my routine back in order, May rolled into June. We started getting some proper heat. People were talking about a dry season with no hint of rain for a long time to come. And they weren't wrong. There wouldn't be a drop of water for 2.5 weeks. Midway through June, I was back on patrol duty. Charlie and Reggie were back to covering dispatch. Nick and I were on the same team courtesy of a thankfully short conversation with Sheriff Mason. I got the impression that the duck were backing off, like some kind of situation had sort of resolved itself seemingly. I was on my way home from a particularly rough shift. A couple of tourists have tried to shoplift from the local grocery store. After resisting arrest and racking up 2 counts of obstruction, they managed to fail themselves all the way into a felony charge. Hysterical people were a part of the job, but they were a shitty part of the job. But yeah, Tom's Cog doesn't have a lot of those. It was nice to have something regular to do for once. Coming home from that shift, I felt like things were getting back to normal. The first drops of rain spattered against the hood of my car as I pulled into the driveway of my house. The moment I stepped outside, it felt like bliss. The water was cooling, reassuring in a way. Like Mother Earth was whispering to me that things were gonna be okay. I just stopped for a second, put down my groceries, and basked in it. I found myself with my arms outstretched and my mouth wide open, just drinking it all in. I stood there for 35 minutes. I'm not gonna lie, that was worrisome. Up until that point, I'd been fine. Could that 1 hour of sore linger in your system that long? Could that be what caused it? I tried to rationalize it, thinking that I was overreacting. But in Tom's Cog, there's no such thing as overreacting. If anything, people tended to shove life-threatening bullshit under the rug way too fast, myself included. So just to make sure, I gave Nick a call explaining what I had done.
Yeah, that's a symptom,
he said.
but I think some folks would just sort of stop at that, especially at the ass end of things.
So it could mean that's the last of it, I asked, like it's out of my system.
Sure, yeah, it could. It's like when you get a bad cold. You get a runny nose, you get a headache. But that's just your body fighting it off. This is sort of like that.
So what do I do?
I keep an eye on it, and if it gets worse, we do something.
And do what? Nick was quiet. I looked back at my still-packed groceries, pacing restlessly. Do what, Nick?
Something. I don't know.
There were a couple of signs that things weren't okay, but they were harder to spot than you might imagine. It is only later when I looked back on this time that I realized these weren't really normal things. For example, automatic doors stopped working. They would close on me seemingly at random, as if they didn't register that I was really there. It got annoying after a while, and I even got my foot stuck at one point. Another thing was the water. No matter how hot I set the water to, it would end up going cold after a couple of seconds. I had to start taking really short showers. I called a plumber on 2 separate occasions, and both times they assured me that nothing was wrong. And then there were the birds. There were just a handful of them, but I would start to spot these bright red birds circling outside. They would flee and scatter at the sight of me, but I had never seen them before. They weren't native to the area. In and of themselves, these events would just be weird happenstances. But in the context of being exposed to something that I didn't understand, they had to be connected. And then there was that one morning. I got to work, used the bathroom, and as I washed my hands, I looked up to see my reflection. As I did, I watched it turn to ash. The skin looked like it sagged off my face and evaporated into dust, leaving a blackened, charcoal-like skull behind. Empty sockets, leaving a dead, empty stare. I tried to blink it away, but the image wouldn't disappear. I would turn my head, and as I did, the reflection would do the same, until decay caused the skull to detach and roll off the shoulder. As it did, the light flickered. There is a sound. I expected a thud, but it was something darker, more rumbling, like a drawn-out hello. I ran out, grabbed Nick by the arm, and got out of the station. I got a lot of weird looks that day, but I had started to get a bit of a reputation as a wild card anyway. At least I wasn't just a rookie. Nick pulled himself free, looking me up and down. It took him a couple of seconds to soften his expression. "It's getting worse, huh?" he asked. "Yeah, a lot. Look, the only one I can think of that would know something about this is Digman, but I hate that guy." "What?" I said. "Don't we have guys on surveillance?" "Oh, he's been gone for weeks. Suspected dead." "Dead?" I scoffed. "How are we not talking about this?" "It's not been confirmed or anything," Nick shrugged. "There's no body." "So what the hell do we do then?" Nick paced a little, adjusting his pink sunglasses. Looking back at the station, I could see that we had a bit of an audience. "We could get the doc," I suggested. "They study this, right?" You would go away," Nick said, shaking his head. "Permanently." Nick looked around as if expecting to see an answer in our immediate vicinity. Either that or he's having trouble keeping eye contact. "I don't know," Nick said. "There's this one thing that's sort of a cure-all kind of deal, but it's dumb, like real dumb, like actual dumb." "Nick, I gotta, what are you suggesting?" "Look, if you can hold on, I'm not suggesting anything else that you could, technically." "Come on, Nick, spit it out." He rolled his eyes and he threw out his arms in surrender. "You could do a year walk. Same as Digman. You would have to make it until New Year's and then a whole other year, but I've seen it done. It's an absolutely insane thing, but it can do anything." "When you say anything, what exactly do you mean?" Nick lowered his glasses and his voice. "It can literally bring the dead back to life. I bet my life that it could wipe away whatever shit you got in your system." "That's like chopping off your neck because you got a headache." "I'm just saying," Nick clarified. "There's always a backup plan." Things would escalate from there. The next time it rained, just a couple of days later, I lost 1.5 hours. I stepped outside and blacked out, waking up with a mouthful of rainwater. I started having nightmares. I would have no idea what about. I would just wake up with a cold sweat and a heart-pounding panic. I knew that it was bad, but I didn't know why. Sometimes there'd be bruises. And this one time, I woke up with an awful stomach cramp. I rushed to the bathroom thinking that I had indigestion when I tripped on the threshold. I landed stomach first on the bathroom tiles, and there was this fullness in my throat that just spurted out. I coughed up about 6 thin white strings. It was just the end of them. They were still attached to me though. I could feel them moving in my throat. I tried pulling them out, but the cramp sent this shockwave of pain through me, like the strands had roots in my gut. It felt like pulling them out might kill me. I got up off the floor and grabbed some nail clippers. Taking a single strand, I clipped it off. I got this intense pain in my chest, like my heart didn't know what to do. It felt like I had been stabbed or lost a tooth. There was this sharp, cutting pain, curling all the way from my throat down to the base of my spine. I just stood there, having these white strands hanging from the edge of my lips, like I had swallowed a cheap wig. There was only one option. I leaned my head back and slowly but surely swallowed. I spent the better part of an hour on that bathroom floor clutching my stomach. I thought about getting in the shower, but it would just be too cold. A single dead strand of white lay in the sink, stinking of chlorine and ammonia. It was so acidic that it discolored the ceramic with a tinge of blue. Later that night, I spent time going through Adam's notes. The man had been researching SOAR for some time, and although his notes made little sense, I figured there might be something in there that I had missed. Flipping page after page after page, I lulled myself into a semi-hypnotic state. Handwritten notes took ages to read. The notes were mostly focused on what he thought his daughter Elizabeth had been exposed to, but he was making an attempt to piece together info about the condition itself as well. And that was the scariest thing. It was never a disease or an infection. It was a condition. Every page all but confirmed that SOAR didn't destroy or introduce anything to the body. It escalated something that we already contained. It meant that whatever effect SOAR was triggering had a universal component already present in every single human. And according to Adam's notes, a handful of other creatures. Lions most notably, and certain kinds of fish. Falling asleep over the notebooks, I barely even read anymore. I just saw the pages flip. But there was something off. I was holding my head up with my left hand and checking my phone with my right. So how was I turning the page? As something cold retracted down my throat, it felt like swallowing a sort of tasteless, gelatinous yogurt, soft, boneless, and chunky. I fell out of my seat, tapping my body. My chest, my stomach, my head. I was okay, I wasn't even nauseous. But my heart was racing like a steam engine, and I could feel the strange weight in the pit of my stomach. Like I was full but without eating. Something was pressing against my organs, albeit ever so gently. I picked up the phone and called Nick. I ran into my bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. I looked normal. I was okay.
Yeah?
Nick answered. It's worse. It's so much worse.
I can be there in 15. Please. Are you gonna tell me what's...
I made this ungodly noise like I was bracing for a sneeze. But instead of a sneeze, I felt something rooted in my stomach shoot itself out of my throat. A white tentacle-like appendage slapped my phone out of my hand, sending it across the room. The reflection in the mirror was still standing as I fell to the floor. It was turning to ash and reaching its hands towards the appendage, almost like a greeting or an invitation. The two reached towards one another. I grabbed the thing coming out of my throat, but it was slippery. It felt like trying to strangle soap. I couldn't think straight. What was I even fighting? What was happening to me? Rushing towards the door, I caught a final glimpse of that reflection. It wasn't just a decaying me reaching out. There was something behind it, something impossibly dark, guiding its arm. Like a tutor teaching a pupil. It reminded me of how my mom had stood behind me at the shooting range when I was a teenager. A memory that up until that point had been nothing but positive. Crashing through the door, I stumbled through the living room, dragging the exposed white appendage behind me like an unfriendly dog on a leash. I tried leaning my head back and swallowing, forcing it back down my throat. But I just ended up gagging on air. It was straining itself, testing the roots in the pit of my stomach. It struggled, knocking over a couple of chairs as it twitched and slithered back and forth on the floor. I leaned back against the wall, bracing myself to pull. It was gonna hurt like hell, but I had no choice. And then I accidentally hit the light switch. All of a sudden, it retracted. It rolled back down my throat like a measuring tape, snapping hard enough that it tapped the tip of my nose going down. Kinda like the spaghetti scene in Lady and the Tramp. Another memory forever spoiled by that thing. I waited by the door in the light. I didn't know what to do. I was getting worse by the day, and there was no doubt in my mind that it was a sore thing anymore. There had been illustrations in Adam's notebooks, descriptions. Hell, I had seen the thing burst out of him that night in May, just before Nick and I killed him and set fire to his remains. I was screwed. There was no other way to say it. Going to the Duck would put everyone under investigation, and I'd be gone. Staying with Nick could mean infecting others. When Nick pulled up, I walked out of the door and held up a hand. I had no idea what I was going to do or say, but I couldn't put him in danger again. Sore could spread at minimum contact, and there was no way that I could control it. I had no idea if a sneeze or a light touch could infect him. I had to keep my distance. "You okay?" he asked, stepping out of the car. You got anything?" I asked. "Any solutions?" "Not yet," he admitted. "But I think our best bet is to go hunting for Digman. They say he's gone, but he's a slippery shit. I don't think he could die if he wanted to." Yeah, I nodded. "Sounds good. You don't look okay. I mean, you got that heroin chic thing going on, but it's like more heroin than chic." "I'll be good, Nick." And there was something about my tone that made him quiet down. We looked at one another in silence, considering the weight of our words. "It's real bad, huh?" "Uh-huh," I nodded. I looked down. Usually Nick could fix things. He could help me or I could help him. But this time my partner was as helpless as I was. "I think you should go, Nick. You can get sick." Screw that. I'm serious." He looked at me with arms crossed. I hadn't even noticed how he hadn't brought his trademark pink sunglasses. "What are you gonna do?" he asked. "I don't know," I shrugged. "But you gotta go. I can't control it." "Are you asking or telling me?" "I'm asking." He bit his lip, putting his hands at his side. He wanted to say something else, but he couldn't. He just gave me this look like he was asking me to reconsider. But I shook my head at him. He reluctantly got back in his car, and to his credit, he did as I asked, and he laughed. I packed some things, mostly notebooks, some clothes, and cash. I locked the place up, got in my car, and drove. I couldn't stick around where I might hurt someone. At the end of the day, it was still about protect and serve. I tried to not look in the rearview mirror or the side mirrors. It felt like something was off, like they weren't really showing me what they should. There was that feeling that a tiny tilt would show me something that I didn't want to see. I would have to blink away things that weren't there. I would see shapes lining the side of the road. I'd feel something in my stomach twist and turn, as if commanded by something to act. I bit down hard, making sure that my teeth touched, and I put a hand in front of my mouth. But it didn't help for long. Something tickled my nose instead. I remember thinking, no. That's all I was thinking. Streetlights were passing me by as I sped up. As I got further out of town, the streetlights made way for worse and worse dirt roads, leaving me into the spaces the Tomscog folks rarely went. I didn't really think about it. If that's what it was gonna be, then that's what it was gonna be. I would see humanoid shapes on the sides, darkened, charcoal-like things, like the decay that I had seen looking back at me in the mirror. I could taste the sourness in my mouth as something struggled to be freed, and I could see things moving in the mirrors at the edge of my vision. I was doing something that it didn't want, and it was gonna let me know. It wanted to be around people. It wanted to meet others. Screw that. My car shook. Even with the seatbelt, I smacked my head against the roof of the car as I hit a rock. I almost lost my steering. I had to pull the handbrake, coming to a full stop. As my body shot forward, the car screeched to a halt. The second my body thumped against the seatbelt, little white strands shot out of my whole face. A tickle in my eyes and nose, something between my teeth, something running out of my ears like a bad earwax. The strands were almost 2 feet long now, scattered along the dashboard and moving independently of one another. Chlorine and ammonia. The smell was overwhelming, and for a moment I just sat there. I was afraid to move, thinking that I was a sudden jerk away from excruciating pain. I slowly pulled my head back and turned the car off. I just sat there with my face feeling like a leaking lemon. Was this the end stage? Was I about to lose my mind like Adam had? I looked up to see my reflection in the mirror. It hurt when I blinked. Little strands of white were moving my eyelashes, forcing me to blink over and over. I was expecting to see some horrific vision, but all I saw was myself. That was bad enough. Looking out into the dark, I could see silhouettes. Things as dark as decay moving closer. An army asking me to join. Something horrible and primal bringing out the worst in me, making it spill out like an overflowing bowl. I got out of the car and brought my flashlight. If light messed with these things, I'd mess with them all the way to my grave. I kept going down the broken dirt road by foot, desperate to get as far away as I could. I saw an old sign saying St. Gall, but I had no reference to what that might mean. There was no place on the map with that name. Maybe I was just distracted. I think I had heard it mentioned a couple of times. My light would land on things, things peeking out behind trees, things moving in the grass, distant whispers, interested parties taking note. A drop of blood ran from my nose. I was having trouble concentrating. I couldn't remember the name of the Winslows anymore. Did I even like Family Matters? Was that even a TV show? I fell to my knees. I couldn't keep up with thinking and moving at once, so I settled for thinking. I sat there on my knees, confounded and confused. I didn't even notice me turning the flashlight off and embracing the dark. I remember looking up and seeing something massive coming towards me. It didn't make a sound. It was just this presence, hollow and immense. When it finally spoke, it was as if spoken from behind a pane of glass, resonating, vibrating, trying to break through. Hello. I waved back, one finger at a time, like I was drumming on an invisible dashboard. Hello, I said. How are you? It reached for me, and the things inside me reached back, like extending for a handshake. Someone welcoming an old friend. A promise of something horrible to come. I was just the broken shell of a snail waiting to be replaced. White strands raised themselves out of me. Something large adjusted itself, causing me to almost tip over. I tried pulling back, but there was no point. Not only was I exhausted, but I didn't understand what I was fighting against. But I remember laughing out loud. Because despite knowing that I was about to die, that something would be torn from me. A thought crossed my mind. Carl Winslow was the dad on Family Matters. And in that moment, I knew that this thing hadn't really won. Not yet. I could still think. I gathered whatever thoughts that I could muster and directed it into a tiny little movement. I twitched my thumb and the flashlight came back on. I had been holding it on the ground and it lit up my face like I was a kid telling a scary story. My face burned as it retreated into me, like a rabbit diving for its burrow. I was left with these chemical streaks across my face and this awful tickle in my throat. But for a brief moment, there was nothing there. It was just a nice summer night with frogs croaking in the distance, and the stars as bright as ever. Miss, are you harmed? I turned around to see somebody coming down the road. A nice-looking woman in a blue kaftan. She got closer and I wanted to keep my distance, but I physically couldn't. I can't imagine what I must have looked like. And yet this woman stopped about 6 feet away and sat down. She didn't seem the least bit bothered. You should go. Don't get sick. I will not get sick, she said. So that's not going to be a problem. You could get sick, I mumbled. It could kill. No, she smiled. That will not be an issue. She got up, scooched closer, and sat across from me. I tried to crawl back, but I couldn't get my arms to move. Sore was reaching into my brain, and I could feel it. I could hear the roots crackling as they physically wrapped around my brainstem. It wouldn't let me control myself again. Did you come here to get help? She asked. No, to get away. Don't sick. Really, even now that is what you're thinking about. Don't get... I couldn't finish my sentence. My head hung low as a weight fell on my neck. She put her hand on my chin and lifted me up to look at her. Look, sweetie, I cannot tell a lie. So what I'm saying is not just comfort. It's what it's going to be, understand? I tried to nod at her, but I couldn't. This thing will not kill you, it will not control you. You will not infect anyone. I promise that's not gonna happen. It cannot happen. She wiped a tear from my eye with her thumb. My tear was a light blue. You will feel better in the morning, she smiled. Here, and try to remember the nice human lady with the kaftan who helped you, yes. She handed me a handkerchief, gave me a kiss on the cheek, and wandered off down the road. I closed my eyes listening for her footsteps to disappear. I must have sat there for hours, all night. At the crack of dawn, I found myself still sitting in the middle of the road, clutching a handkerchief with a little blue sunflower on it. My legs had long since fallen asleep. I was hungry and tired, dirty as all hell. I could feel something dried on my face, leaving scabs and flakes to be picked off. I closed my eyes, testing myself to see if I was really okay. I thought about the show Family Matters again. It was a good measuring tape. Carl Winslow was the dad, Harriet was the mom, Laura and Eddie were the kids. And then I couldn't help but laugh. Urkel, I chuckled. Steve Urkel. It was all there, all the little bits and bobs from the back of my mind. I was really feeling better, like the lady had said I would. I don't know how she did it or why. I could still feel something inside, but I was in control. I could keep it down, I could breathe. And there was no pain, not even a threat of pain. It won't kill me, I muttered. It won't, in fact. I don't know how to describe it. I believed her, it felt true. I don't know how it could be, but it was. I was certain of it. I stumbled my way back to my car, closed the door, and put on my seatbelt. There were these splashes of blue across the dashboard from where the white strands had touched. I must have been hours, maybe minutes away from falling under the influence of that thing like Adam. But where he had lost his mind, I'd gotten a strange second wind. Maybe it was like Nick had said, that it was just the sickness taking its course. But I don't think that's it. I think what saved me that night was a chance encounter with a woman from St. Gall. The first thing I did was call him. It just took 2 signals. I'm better, I said. I think I'm gonna be okay.
You fixed it.
Well, kinda.
How?
There was a lady and... I looked down at the handkerchief with the blue sunflower and I laughed a little at myself. It was such a stupid moment, but it was so relieving. And Steve Urkel, I guess.
Are you drunk?
I'm sure as hell gonna be. I hung up and watched the Minnesota sun come up over the horizon. I had made it through the night. There might be more trouble down the road, but for now I was okay. But in that moment, I just had to sit for a while. Strange how I can't to this day picture what that lady really looked like. I know she was a nice lady with a blue caftan,